Select Board meeting for Monday, February 8th, 2021. We're going to begin this evening with an executive session meeting, and then we will be resuming into open session thereafter. Hopefully we will be back before the public around 6:30 p.m. So if I could have a motion, please.
Okay, Madam Chair, I move that the Select Board enter into executive session pursuant to MGL Chapter 30A, Section 21A2, to conduct strategy and preparation for negotiations with non-union personnel, or to conduct collective bargaining sessions or contract negotiations with non-union personnel, and to convene an open session thereafter.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. All those in favor, Mr. Nordhaus?
Aye.
Mr. Glavy?
Aye.
Mr. Knox?
Aye.
And Cindy Napoli is aye. And so we will now convene into executive session. We should be back hopefully around 6:30 p.m. Thank you. We're ready?
Ready.
Hold on one second. Oh, my volume went. Are we ready to go, Anthony?
Yes, we're all set, Madam Chair.
Okay. Good evening, Littleton, and welcome to the Select Board meeting for Monday, February 8th, 2021. We're going to begin this evening's meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
To the flag
for the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Things like moving all over the place. Okay, so we're going to begin this evening's meeting with a reading of the mail. That will be followed by a Department of Revenue presentation and discussion of the financial management review we requested. It's 7. We're hoping that we will have department and board updates and requests. We have the police department appropriation transfer request to purchase a police vehicle. We have the building department appointment of Michael Kenny as the local inspector. We have human resources appointment of Valerie Into as assistant human resource administrator. That will be followed by public input and member updates. At 7:20, we have a presentation by LLB Inc. They're going to do a presentation on the space needs, and we're going to have a discussion regarding a senior center and financial options. That will be followed by town council is going to join us for a presentation of an update regarding our personnel bylaw. And then that will be followed by a host community agreement amendment with Community Care Collective. And that will be followed by at 8:40 an annual and special town meeting warrant for May 3rd, 2021 anticipated Springtown meeting. A vote to appoint, to open the warrant and set a closing date of the warrant and insert articles. At 8:50, we're opening up select board discussions regarding 12 Robinson Road, the deed restriction discussion, a feasibility study application to Community Preservation Committee, a request for a proposal to purchase, lease, or manage the property, and pest control plan and additional capital project, possibly repair to the cellar door of the property. So the select board will discuss that. That will be followed by at 9:10, the town administrator and assistant town administrator update. We have an acceptance of a donation from the protection team of Marble. We have the fiscal year 2022 operating and capital budget update. We have a joint meeting scheduled with the school committee and the town moderator to appoint the Neshoba Valley Technical District School Committee representative, and an amendment to the Director of Finance and Budget Town Accountant contract. That will be followed at 9:30 with a review of the select board meeting minutes for our meeting on January 19th and January 25th, 2021. And then at 9:35 is our anticipated adjournment of the meeting. So do we have any mail this evening, Mr. Ansaldi?
Yeah, Madam Chair, just a point of clarification on the, on item 11C. That's just to schedule the joint meeting with the school committee and town
Oh, okay,
moderator.
great.
That's not a joint meeting tonight.
Okay, perfect.
I don't think they'd be very happy with me if I scheduled a joint meeting.
Thanks for clarifying that.
Okay, so we have a couple things, Madam Chair, for the meal. I just want to offer our congratulations to our Assistant Town Treasurer, Anna DeRosa, who was accepted into that Mass Municipal Association Suffolk University program on Municipal Finance Management Seminar. I think if you recall back a couple of meetings ago, I had asked if the board would allow me to send her that even though we have a spending freeze on, and you did. So that's very competitive to get in there. So I'm really pleased that she was accepted into that. And the items that they go over is they're going to go over an overview of local services, the Department of Revenue local services. They're going to get into municipal budgeting. They're going to talk about accounting and financial reporting, treasury and collections, as well as human resources. So she's going to get a lot of information. I think it's going to really help her. The second item is an advertisement for that the board, the school committee, and town moderator is seeking, excuse me, resident interested citizens to apply for the position of district representative to Neshoba Valley Technical High School School Committee. So that appointment is going to be made a joint committee meeting with the school committee, select board, and the moderator. That's a 3-year term. The current term expires March 31st, 2021. So this one term would go from April 1st, 2021 to March 31st, 2024.
Is there a vacancy because someone's not applying for it again, or?
I think it's the term is up anyways, Paul, so I'm not sure. Was it Charlie that was on that?
Charlie was, yeah, I think so. And we had an alternative. I can't think.
Yeah, we did do an alternate back a couple years ago. I was here for that. But so this is my understanding, this is that regular full-time position that's up. It has to be renewed.
And we don't have any indication whether Charlie is not interested, because he was the chairman last time, though.
Yeah, I would, Joe, do you happen to know? I want to say yes. I think that he would.
I'm almost positive the answer is yes.
Yeah, we just haven't received anything yet from him.
Okay. Well,
so he's aware of this.
he is aware. Okay.
Yes. So any letters of interest should be submitted no later than February 26th, 2021 to the office of the Town of Littleton Select Board. And it can be dropped off, it can be mailed to that address, or it can be emailed to selectboard@littletonma.org. And that's it, Madam Chair.
All right, excellent. Thank you very much. So next on our agenda, we have a Department of Revenue presentation.
Yes, Madam Chair. So back in November of 25th of 2019, Finance Director Cheryl Stella presented the option of having the Division of Local Services Technical Assistance Bureau conduct a review of our financial management practices. The board discussed that at a meeting on December 16th, 2019, and we're ready to hear that report from the Department of Revenue on the results of that study. So I'll turn it over to Cheryl, and then she can introduce the next panelist that will talk.
Thank you, Anthony. So I'd like to introduce Theo, and sorry, Theo, if I butcher your last name, Calvadias, who is the project manager on the financial management review, and Frank, who assisted him as well with that presentation and the report.
So you just got to let them in, Cheryl. So
if you could let me know who.
It's Theo Calvadias and Frank Gervisio.
Okay, I see Gervisio and then Theo. Okay.
Gervasio.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening. How are you?
Doing well, thank you. There he is.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you. So you have a presentation for us tonight?
Yes, I do. Let me
Summary
just
of your review. Excellent.
call it up here. Okay. Should I just start?
Please.
Great. Okay, there we go. Okay, good evening, everybody. My name is Theo Kalivas. I'm a project manager at the Technical Assistance Bureau at the Division of Local Services at the DOR. Coming with me to Littleton this time was Assistant Product Manager Frank Gervasio, who I think you've already had a hello with. And so I'm just going to be taking you through basically, pretty straightforward presentation on the recommendations in the report. So a little overview of what an FMR is. It's something that's performed at the request of the Board of Selectmen in a town. It's conducted by TAB project managers where we interview staff, we review the town's financial data, we review the town's bylaws, we evaluate their financial practices, and we both planning and operational. We use all of that to make recommendations based on best practices. And it's important to note that it's not an audit. We don't test anything. We don't comb through with a fine-tooth comb all of your financial data. It's really just a evaluation on where you can improve in terms of best practice. So just a little bit of context for the report and where what we were looking for. We understand that in April of 2019, there was some significant fraud by the previous finance director into getting some failures in their internal control structures. So for us, this demonstrated a clear need to focus on things like well-defined lines of accountability and ensuring there's robust and formalized control practices. And that's sort of the lens that we took to when we did our interviews and we put together the report. So based on those interviews, and we understand the town's also made steady progress on issues that have been a problem in the past. For instance, the town administrator is now reviewing the warrant. There's requisition approval for $5,000 for expenditures, and he approves the department head expense requests. Also, the finance department's been updating workflow and working on new process documentation throughout this whole period. So basically, it seems like there were some issues, and the town is making pretty steady progress to try and correct things in the past that have been an issue in the past. We also understand that the town had an evaluation done by the firm Clifton Larson Allen that produced many recommendations. And I just want to say our FMR is not intended to reproduce their work, but we've had a look at the report. We encourage the finance department to continue its steady progress in implementing those recommendations. And our recommendation should be seen as supplemental to that. Okay, so tab recommendations typically are intended to, our recommendations here are intended to build on the progress that's been made so far, to codify the strict lines of accountability with, going back to those lines of accountability and control structures, and to ensure that your departmental practices are rooted in robust internal control principles that are supported by policy and clear documentation. Okay, so now I'm just going to get right into the recommendations unless there are any questions so far.
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. So our first recommendation is to strengthen the town administrator's role in the budget process. Oops, didn't mean to do that. Basically, we believe the town administrator should have a role in directing budget development, at least in terms of having overall accountability track back to the budget, the town administrator. You can delegate responsibility to, for instance, the finance director, to others in terms of the nuts and bolts of what tasks get done. But we think it's important to place the town administrator as the representative of the Board of Selectmen, which is the executive body of the town, at the sort of the top of that process. One way to do that is to implement the Select Board's budget goals and objectives. At the beginning of the process, the town administrator could meet with the Select Board and develop goals and objectives around the town's financial situation for the upcoming budget season. From that, can develop spending parameters for departmental requests. Tell departments we're looking at such and such goals and objectives for this year. And that's translated to don't spend more than a 2% increase, something like that. Basically wanting, and the face of that will be dictated by your needs and your institutions, but basically to take a more active role in the departmental budget review. One way to further take this along is to eventually develop budget requests into a comprehensive budget document. So what that means, we'll have the town administrator sort of at the head of budget development for the departments, with the finance director doing a lot of the solicitation of requests and compiling requests. Then when we get to the review process, we'll have the finance director with the town administrator together, looking at those requests with an eye toward those long-term goals and overall goals and objectives, and taking those budget requests and turning them into a compiled budget document. And from that can go on to the next level to be submitted to the boards or to the finance committee. That type of budget document would have a forecast and a breakdown of that year's revenues and expenditures, would have departmental level detail for every department, the annual change that year, different budget requests, what was going on that led to this type of request, and also just departmental level detail on the budget for that year, and then also a section on the capital budget. One way to sort of make sense of all this for towns we find too is to adopt a budget policy. A budget policy basically just outlines who's doing what, when, what are the goals, what are the tasks that need to be completed, whose responsibility is it, who has the authority to do what, and what is the timeline that has to be completed. So it's something, it'll include a budget calendar, it'll include bigger strategic goals, and it might include monitoring guidelines for during the year. So basically just something to set straight who's doing what, when, and what are we trying to accomplish when we do it. Excuse me. Any questions so far?
Any questions from the board? Okay,
Okay, great.
thank you.
The next recommendation was to delegate warrant signing authority to the town administrator. This is just basically, something to reduce administrative complexity. Easier to get a town administrator who's always in the office to sign off on the warrant rather than tracking down a majority of the Board of Selectmen. It ensures the town administrator also has a place in reviewing disbursements, and it prevents the potential for missing town obligations due to the inability to contact select board members. I understand that you have employed DocuSign as well right now, which probably makes it a little bit easier in terms of getting signatures on the warrant. But in general, we feel this is a more efficient way to go about doing things. Next one is to adopt financial operations policies in order to support formalized internal control practices. So we think the town, the town had some pretty good financial policies on the website from what we were able to see, but we felt it would be helped with policies on fraud mitigation, on disbursement practices, on revenue turnovers, on reconciliation processes, and on your year-end closing process. So basically, all of the sort of financial activities that yield accurate books and that ensure that are in place to prevent fraud and reduce errors, having a policy on them is a really good idea because it codifies and standardizes your internal control practices. Nobody can say they didn't know what they were doing. And it adds the level of organization that's essential to these essential processes that ensures they're without error and free of fraud. So you can always go back and say, okay, well, are we behind on reconciliations? We're supposed to be reconciling once a month or whatever. We're not doing that. We better catch up. Or you make sure that you figure out a process that works for turnovers, for example. You have that in the policy and everybody can see the policy and focuses on the policy. And make sure that every time they do one, they're doing it according to the policy. Next one was to conduct a workflow analysis and create a procedures manual. So basically this is about analyzing the financial workflows as they're performed in the finance departments. It's a good opportunity now that you've gone through or are going through a Munis conversion. I'm sure there's a lot of headaches with that, but it's also an opportunity to, as you relearn the central processes through Munis, you write down how it works and you compile that into a manual. So I think the sort of takeaway from this one is this allows you to better cross-train other employees. You can have essential stuff down in manual if somebody's out for an extended period of time or unexpectedly. Somebody else can pop up, look in the manual, and see how to do things. It also allows you to get somebody up and running if they're new. So you have a lot of institutional knowledge in a present employee. They're not going to be there forever, as I'm sure you all went through recently. So you put that down in the manual or document it otherwise, and you can onboard that new employer. You can get that person started a lot quicker with the town's processes than having to relearn everything from scratch. So that manual is something that you can adjust every time your financial software changes, like Munis. It's an essential tool for cross-training and onboarding. You'll lay out the departmental tasks and internal control measures in detail. You know, it's stuff like, how do we conduct a reconciliation? How do we submit a requisition? How do we, prepare the warrant? You have step-by-step instructions, including screenshots of the financial software, what to click, where to go, and you can store it electronically on a shared drive so everybody can view it and have access to it and just really be able to know how to do it. We're also recommending, this is something we often recommend too, combining the treasurer and collector departments. You're already at appointed treasurer and collector. That's another thing we frequently recommend, switch from elected to appointed. So now we say, go ahead and just combine the tax collector into the treasurer collector department. Quick way to do that is to create the position of treasurer collector as department head and appoint the same individual, to treasurer and collector. Or, if you don't create the office of the department, the position of treasurer collector, you can simply appoint the same individual to treasurer and to collector, and then you'll effectively have a treasurer and collector. So that's sort of your short-term option. Long-term, you can adjust bylaws to reflect it. You'll want to adjust your bylaws to reflect the combined position, because as I reviewing your bylaws, you have a separate treasurer and a separate collector. So in this case, you might have the collector become the assistant treasurer collector with many of the same duties, basically in charge of collection. But this also provides an opportunity for cross-training, for potential succession planning, and it really allows you to consolidate all your revenue activities into one office. And again, it's one less turnover from one department to another department, one less sort of changing hands of receipts, and one less opportunity for error or for fraud. And yeah, there you go. And it'll make reconciling easier as well. Okay, next recommendation, we often make this one when we have a town collector versus a tax collector, is to designate the tax collector as a town collector. And that just means allowing them to accept any or all town receipts. It streamlines and centralizes revenue collection functions. And again, reduces opportunity for fraud and error because it reduces the need for receipts to change hands during turnovers. If more stuff is coming to one central location, you're not having to chase down various department personnel and reconcile with them with varying levels of success or not, and again reduces the complexity in reconciliation. So it's really just about sort of shoring up the potential lines, potential turnover points that can result in fraud or error. We're also recommending to think about enhancing the assistant town accountant position. And that's just a matter of delegating to the assistant or to other staff, as determined with discussions with the finance director and the town administrator. Sort of more the day-to-day town accountant tasks, stuff like reconciliations, reports, other day-to-day tasks that a town accountant, but not a finance director, might perform. Just to enable the finance director to focus more on the high-level strategic budget development and overall financial goals. Spend a little more time in that sort of high-level area, and maybe just let that be able to perform that duty a little bit more expansively. It also provides the opportunity for cross-training the assistant and the other staff. You have more staff knowing how to do more things, being able to pop in there and get stuff done due to unexpected absence of the town accountant finance director. And also in terms of succession planning, we think training your internal staff is always the way to go. So this would provide an opportunity to do that. And our final recommendation was to conduct financial management team meetings. So this would be basically the director of finance and budget and the other finance department heads. And usually we recommend inviting your IT personnel, your head of IT or IT director, whatever it may be there too, since everything you do in terms of finance is in some way depending on technology, whether it's Munis, Excel, stuff living on some server where you have maybe you have a I know when I used to work in a town, we had a budget spreadsheet that was so completely loaded with links and various other Excel machinations. And if you ever lose that, the budget's gone. So it's important to have the IT in the loop as well. To head any of those things off. So the purpose of a financial management team is to communicate and to get progress on important processes like your budget development, preparing for town meeting, which is really part of budget development, I suppose, forecasting, reconciliations. That puts the director of finance and budget in a position to regularly say, are we reconciling? Are we behind? How behind are we? Have we caught up? Looking at the free cash certification and balance sheet process, and also the tax recapitulation process, provides a forum to discuss getting ready for that, and check progress on the year-end closing and making sure that accounts are closed properly and everything's closed out and accurate. And basically, generally, it's an opportunity to review fiscal challenges and address them as they come up rather than just reacting when they become a problem. You're going to have fires pop up anyway, but with something like this, at least you'll be able to see and smell the smoke a little bit better. Okay, how about that? So with that, those are the recommendations. I'm Theo Clevis. I can be reached at clevis@dor.state.maus for any following questions and any difficult questions or really anything bad sent to Frank.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Mr. Clevis. So I am going to open it up to the board to see if they have any questions or comments on the report. I'll start with Mr. Glavy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I appreciate that because actually Selectman Chuck DeCoste and I were the two that had a chance to participate with Cheryl in this in the interviews last summer, and I've been anxious to hear your report. And thank you both very much for the attention and time you spent with Littleton and your thoughtful recommendations, as well as your analysis. My first thought, just jotted a few down as going through it. I would have butted in if I objected to anything voraciously, because that's my style. So the fact that I didn't probably tells you I'm in general agreement with your recommendations. Specifically, or most importantly, in my mind anyway, in the budget process, it's been a bugaboo of mine for years. I just thought that probably through nobody's intentional efforts, we, the board, and then eventually the TA's position became less and less a part of the budget process than we should be. And the good news is we still ended up with, I think, a pretty good budget product at the end. What was missing oftentimes was the input at the beginning and the monitoring throughout. But so I'm very supportive of the notion of making the board's role in the budget process earlier, in making the TA's role in that more defined and pronounced. So I do think and hope that that's something that we will act on. Probably, we're in a pretty good and far along spot in the current budget process, but hopefully by the time we roll around this summer and implementing next year's process. Second, I think it's just worth pointing out that one of the motivating events, you called it out. We weren't bashful about it either. That asked us or prompted us to ask you rather to conduct this assessment is the management review was the events with the previous finance director. But I'm listening with a keen ear, and I'm not so probably no fault of yours, just based on what your role is. As you say, you didn't do an audit per se, and we already had our auditors provide their specific technical analyses on that. So I'm not sure that there's a direct correlation between a lot of these suggested changes or reforms in actually preventing fraud again, but hopefully we've got that covered from other means. I think these are probably good practices that we want to adopt for any number of reasons. You did hit on too. I appreciate you doing that. I saw in the report that one of the alternative recommendations was for us to adopt DocuSign as a process in the warrant review and signing process, and we already have that as you indicated tonight. If the perceived problem there is gathering signatures becomes a headache and slows things down, I guess I could see that as a reform, but we don't experience that problem. And in fact, I think that's I find it personally, as having been a selectman in two different stages, it's a way, it kind of forces you to stay engaged with things, and it's a level of oversight. So if it isn't slowing things down, and we do use a system like DocuSign, that's something I'd want to hold on to, unless I heard a lot more information as to why we wouldn't want to keep that. Again, getting the TA's position much more focused on the budget and a day-to-day budget and day-to-day administration of the select board goals is right on with me. I think, since the commodity that's most in play here is time and attention, I would much rather see town administrator's office attention be spent on doing that, and less so on having any kind of management role with departments that aren't directly related to the budget or day-to-day administrative processes. So it's just kind of like how to focus your time and attentions. We've had a couple of personnel related issues that both you were aware of and mentioned the one with the finance director's office. We had another issue which also spoke to oversight questions in the building commissioner's office. So I have in my mind the systemic problem there is either not having oversight formally, in certain places, or thinking you have it and it's not happening. So some of those you can solve by adopting policies, and some of those you just have to make sure that the accountability starts at the top, at the board level, and that we understand, which folks answer directly to us, and that we monitor those, and that continues down the line. So I don't want to get too far afield from your recommendations. This is as much for the other members of the call than yourselves, but I would say, let me see if there's anything else worth the collector's issues. This is kind of also a philosophic thing too. I don't know if you've run into it either of you folks, but we've already made the treasurer's position a appointed, not an elected one. But I go back far enough. I'm looking at the call here. I think Joe Knox did too. We grew up in a system that once upon a time had an elected treasurer and had an appointed accountant. And since the accountant answered to the selectman and the treasurer didn't, there was a natural tension there that each one would, provide, at least theoretically, an oversight to the other. Now we're well past that. Now they all work in the same office and they work in a pyramid. And guess what? That's when we had our problem, when that structure was in place. So I'm not proposing we blow it up, but I wonder if, that ever comes up in conversation, that the whole idea of having two different financial centers is that you have a natural tension there and a natural oversight, because one is not dependent on the other in either the management or the hiring processes. So I'll leave that bomb out there for my closing remark.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Glavy. Any other comments from the board?
Yeah, quickly. Actually, following Paul is not much to say. He's covered everything. But I do want to mention something he mentioned also. I think it's important too, that that the town administrator has a place in this whole scheme. I know going back when Anthony was the assistant TA and the former finance director, he had so many problems trying to find out what was going on down there. So I like that part. Mr. Glavy also mentioned the area that I saw too, that I like the town administrator to have a lot of authority, but I still want our board to have the opportunity to look at and sign off on the town warrant. It's not something that I go through item by item, but I do like to scan through sometimes to find out what's going on in certain departments. So I think we want to keep that. A question I do have for you is that on the combining or possible combination of the treasurer and collector, is that something that's common in other towns, or is this something that's newly being adopted?
I would say it's pretty common. And I think we have a database of 250 something towns and something like 100 to 150 of them had a combined treasurer collector of the ones that we talked to. I've seen it more. I found as you get a little further west, it's a little more separate. But a lot of towns on the eastern part and the central part of Massachusetts, and sometimes it's if it's a little bit of a bigger town too. But basically, yes, the trend has been pretty consistently for a little while now to combine your treasurer collector into one department. That's basically like a revenue department.
Thank you. I'm all set.
All right, great.
Madam
Mr.
Chair.
Nordhaus?
Yes, thank you. I do echo Joe and Paul's comments on the warrant. If it's not a problem, let's keep signing them. I think just like Mr. Knox, scan it. I don't obsessively read it, but it is fascinating to see what's going on. And then I want to just amplify one of the things that Mr. Glavy said about the budgeting process and the board. I think we spoke on our retreat earlier about the board's involvement and where we should fit in. And I do feel as though the high-level goals discussion didn't really happen this year. And I'm not making a judgment or blaming. I think there are a lot of good reasons why it didn't happen. But of all the things that I read in that report, I feel like that was probably the one that to me seems like the most important. I mean, our role as executive is to set the priorities. And it feels like the conversations that we had this year, at least, it was almost an afterthought that we were presented with a book. Again, like no judgment. Like I understand it's like flat, level funding, and we had a transfer of like a whole bunch of people. It's totally understandable, but I do want to try to make sure that happens next year, assuming COVID's gone. And then I had one, I think, very brief question, maybe for you, Cheryl. There's a mention of a number of policies like the fraud mitigation policy. I'm curious if those have been written and if they're around, or are they still in process?
No, they haven't been written. So, while there are a comprehensive set of financial policies, some of those areas that Theo mentioned, like fraud mitigation, year-end closing, things like that, are not part of that. So that is still something that we need to write.
And I could just say, there are sample policies for all of the ones at the appendix of the report, so hopefully that's helpful to all of you in putting them together.
And I do want to thank you for the work you put in. It was a very interesting to read and illuminating. So I appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm glad.
That's all I have.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much, and I do concur with my colleagues' comments regarding the signing of the warrant. I personally do read through them, so it's something that I would like to continue to do. And I do have one question for Cheryl. In the Clifton Larson report from 2019, there was a recommendation about the cash policy. Do you know if that was ever updated to coincide with the Munis system?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Okay,
No.
all right.
No, I would say that, like I mentioned before, there are some really good comprehensive financial policies, but as far as, some of the policies that Theo mentioned and Clifton Larson mentioned, those are definitely still areas we need to work on.
Work in progress.
Yes,
Okay, great.
absolutely.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much. Great report. We appreciate your time. And Anthony, any recommendation on where we go from here with this? What will be the next steps?
So, thank you, Frank and Theo. Yeah, I think the best thing was for Cheryl and myself to come up with a game plan on how we're going to address these recommendations, as well as Clifton and Larson recommendations. And it should be something that we're working towards. So we need to do some internal scheduling and planning, and then we can report back to the board on where we stand with these.
Okay. Excellent. Great. Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. We
Thank
appreciate
you
it.
all.
Great. You're welcome. Thanks for having us. Glad the report is helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Good night,
Have a
everyone.
good night. Thank
Good
you.
night. So next on the agenda, we have department board updates and requests. And the first on the agenda, we have the police department. We have Chief Bernard on the call with us, Mr. Ansaldi.
Yes, he is. We're going to let him in. Oh, there we go. Oh, Madam Chair, before we get into Chief Bernard, Joe has informed me that he too was got into the program of MMA in Suffolk that Anna did. So
Oh,
that's great news, because I know Joe was it was an area where Joe wanted to strengthen his skill was in finances. So this is great. And he just texted me and let me know. So Joe, congratulations.
that's excellent news. Congratulations, Joe.
Thanks.
Yes, Chief.
Good evening. Good evening, Chief Bernard.
Good evening. Thank you for having me on tonight. I appreciate being part of the agenda. As you're well aware, the capital requests have been slimmed year after year. And in looking at the capital request a couple of years ago, we put in for 2 or 3 cruisers. We were cut down to 1. Again, this year when I went to present 2 more cruisers, again, I was told, capital's a little slim. We're going back down to 1 again. Chief King and Chief Kelly, my priors, had a plan in place where every year we would do at least 2 cruisers, and it was keeping maintenance costs at a low. Now, looking forward to fiscal 2023, I just had a conversation with the finance director, Cheryl Stella, and town administrator Ansaldi, and explained, listen, when we go for the fiscal plan for the next year and the year after, it's not going to be a want at this point in time. It's going to be a need. And I hope you understand that. And I'm not sure exactly what the capital request is going to look like going forward, but again, I'm anticipating it's going to be, cut it down to 1, which is going to put us back and back and back further and further.
Mhm.
We spoke about this briefly, and there is going to be a surplus of overtime in salary line items due to the fact that obviously because of COVID, we can't have any of the community policing events that we normally have. We don't have any of the trainings that we normally have. We don't have any court proceedings that are actually happening up until last month. But again, they're at a scaled down version because they're doing a lot of the hearings via Zoom. So I anticipate to have a large amount of money in our overtime salary line items. I explained that to finance director and also to T. Ansaldi, and they suggested that we try to come up with a way to have a transfer of salary line items into a expense account for the end of the year. I did make a request to 2 of our car wholesalers, our car dealers that help us. And I said, if this were to happen, would we be in line to be able to get a car? As you're well aware, that production is kind of set back, and we're actually still waiting on our car right now, which hopefully will be in service in the next 3 or 4 weeks. They did say that we could make it happen, probably not a total line car item, but we could make one of the administrative cars replace one of the detective unit cars that has high mileage on it at this point in time. High mileage on it as into a police cruiser, but not high mileage on as like an everyday driver for the building inspector or whatnot in the town hall So I'm hoping, and I'll turn it over to Anthony at this point in time, but I'm hoping that this is something that we can actually look very seriously at over the next couple of weeks and see if we can actually do the transfer to make the expenses, to make my expense count a little higher and go forward.
Okay.
Thanks, Chief. As Chief indicated, yeah, there's a need, and this isn't normal Littleton practice. You know, we don't do appropriation transfers, and we normally wait with the capital as part of the capital process in the budgeting. But looking at our financial picture over the next 2 to 3 years, especially with some items that we're going to be discussing tonight, to me, it really didn't make sense kicking this can down the road when we have the funds to do it this year. So certainly in other communities that I've worked, and I'll go back to my Brookline days, this is something that we did do. We did appropriation transfers, and it requires the select board and the finance committee to weigh in on that. So given our current situation, I think that this is a good plan, and I certainly support it, and would like the select board to adopt it, and then FinCom to adopt it for this year only.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Ansaldi. I mean, I agree with you. I appreciate Chief Bernard and working with our finance team to come up with a solution. As you mentioned, capital funds are limited. Certainly a police vehicle is a need and not a want. And, the cycle of purchasing those vehicles was put in place for a reason. And as you mentioned, if we go off cycle, it's just kicking the can down the road. So we do need to address it. I'm absolutely supportive of this idea. I think it's a solution, and that's what we need is more thinking along those lines. So, if other board members have any comments, or Mr. Glaby?
I think Matthew might have got in before me.
Okay, Mr. Nordhaus.
Maybe just a hair. Miss Chief Bernard, can you clarify? Does the overtime money completely cover the new cruiser?
Yeah, we're going to have a very large amount of money left over with overtime and salary line items, which we'll still be putting money into free cash.
Okay.
That's the question, but
and that was my next question: is where does that go if it doesn't go to the cruiser, which is it goes into free cash? Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much.
I was educated on the same exact line item.
I'm sorry, my daughter's distracting me. Mr. Glaby?
Hey, my cat's asleep, so he won't distract me. I absolutely support this as well, and I appreciate Anthony's comments. It's true, it's not been our practice to do this sort of thing. Wouldn't encourage it, but a few years ago, it used to be kind of more of the norm. Joe would remember this certainly, and it kind of predated a few of the administrators on the call now. But we used to have a special town meeting at the annual. The special was for the current year, and some of these very types of transfers within departments would occur to settle the books, and it's perfectly reasonable 8 months into an operating year budget of the size of ours. Some expenses are going to come in lower than you expect, and some costs are going to be higher, and why wouldn't you want to match it up? And I don't think we want to be doing this on a week-to-week, month-to-month basis, but on a case-to-case basis, makes perfectly good sense.
Thank you, Mr. Glaby.
Mr. Knox, did you have any comments?
No, I agree with the comments that are made. Just one clarification, Chief. What kind of a car are you replacing? It's not a full cruiser?
So this would be a detective unit. We'll knock it down. Again, it's a fine car to drive, but not for responding to any emergency calls.
Okay, thank you.
All right, great. Excellent. So.
There's a motion, Madam Chair.
Excellent.
It's up on the screen.
I'll read that if you're ready for it, Madam Chair.
Please, yep.
I will move that the Select Board vote to approve the appropriation transfer request within their FY21 budget to purchase a police vehicle.
A second.
Motion's been made and seconded. All those in favor, Mr. Knox?
Aye.
Mr. Glaby?
Aye.
Mr. Nordhaus?
Aye.
And Cindy Napoli is aye. The motion is approved as written. Thanks again, Chief.
Thank you, guys. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Chief.
Where did my screen go? Okay. So next on our agenda, we have the building department appointment of Michael Kenny as local inspector.
Madam Chair, we have Ed Mullen, Commissioner, who will do the introduction.
Perfect. Good evening, Mr. Mullen.
Good evening. I'm hoping you can all hear me.
We can.
Yeah, it worked. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for having us tonight. Also on the call tonight is Michael Kenny, new local inspector for the town of Littleton. Should you so choose to appoint him, he comes to us way of Burlington, Massachusetts. He's a great addition to the office. He's also familiar with our software, which has been a huge benefit. Really cut down on the time and training. He's already out in the field doing a few inspections. He's also a 24-year vet of the United States Coast Guard, been deployed several times, and I'd like to welcome him here to Littleton. If you have any questions, he's on the call.
Excellent. Good evening, Mr. Kenny. How are you?
Good, yourself?
Good, thank you. So if you wouldn't mind just give us a brief introduction of yourself, and we'll see if the board members have any questions for you.
Well, I live in Billerica. Have all my life. I know the general area pretty well. Got a lot of good experience in Burlington. I think it's going to help me quite a bit in Littleton. Other than that, I'm just glad to be aboard.
Excellent, thank you. Do we have any questions or comments for Mr. Kenny from the board?
Welcome.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Other than welcome aboard, excellent. Great, so welcome aboard. Thank you very much for coming tonight, and we're excited to have you be part of our team. So do we have a motion ready, Mr. Glavy?
We actually, this is an introduction, Madam Chair,
Oh,
so
okay.
we didn't need a motion on this.
Oh, okay. Excellent.
I'll make a motion to welcome Michael aboard.
Let's do it. All right, good. Excellent. All right, good.
Thank you, everybody. He really is a welcome addition and a well-welcomed hand of help that I've needed for quite some time. And to top it off, he is certified.
Bonus.
Excellent.
I didn't mention that.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you,
All
Mike.
right, thank you.
Right. Nice to
Nice to
meet
meet
you.
you all.
Okay, great. And so next on the agenda, I see we have Bridget Bell on the call with us. We have an appointment of Valerie Into.
Yeah, this is another introduction, Madam Chair.
Oh, okay, excellent. All right, so intro, excellent.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Good
Hi.
evening, everyone. It's good to see
evening.
you. Thank you. So yes, I am here introducing Valerie Into, who is hopefully with your approval will be joining the HR department, or she is actually coming from the collectors department and worked with them as a clerk, and was part of various special projects for the finance team over the last couple of years. Valerie was highly recommended by our finance group, administration, and various other department heads for her work that she had helped them with over the last couple of years. She has a vast technical background and incredible interpersonal skills, so I'm very excited to have her on board and help us grow our HR department. And Val's going to help me with our reconciliations and our Excel, and really just get us moving forward in a great momentum to have the HR department be a well-respected department in the town hall.
Excellent. Great, thank you.
Sure.
So good evening, Valerie, welcome.
Hi there, thank you so much. Can you hear me okay?
We can, yes.
Good.
Yep. So if you'd like, you could just introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself. And
Sure. I live in the town of Harvard, so not too far from you guys. I'm married for many years, 2 kids. And as Bridget said, I worked with you guys already for the past 2 years. I was working in the tax collector office. And as I said to Bridget when I was first talking with her about this, I feel like I love data and I love the tools and the spreadsheets and I love working with people. So it's kind of a combined interest of mine in the HR department. What better way to jump into the spreadsheets and stuff and help Bridget with all the deductions, etc., all the data that we need to manage, as well as working with people. And prior to working with Debbie in the tax collector office, I had a few decades worth of working in the private sector, working a lot in finance operations kind of roles, again, doing a lot of tracking and data information, which I'm a geek that way, and also some account management roles. And prior to that, I was in consulting, mostly focused in healthcare data analytics and helping large employers understand their costs and trends and helping them with benefit decisions and such. So I feel like it's a good background to jump in and work with Bridget.
Also has her bachelor's and a master's degree, so she's has a ton of experience. We're really fortunate to have Val. We have been fortunate now to get him in this new role.
Right.
That is just going to be a big help for us.
Yeah, I agree. Excellent. Any questions or comments from the board? Valerie?
I've got one, Madam Chair.
Sure.
I don't know if this is for Bridget or Valerie or whoever, but are we going to get any trouble for poaching from one department to another? Is everything all cool with the tax collector's office?
Yes, so we've been in communication with Cheryl and her group, and we're hoping to have this be a seamless, productive transition. And Val will be available over the next few weeks to help them through the process. And that's it's a great move, I think, because of Val's experience with the finance group and a lot of the cross training that we've talked about, and the ability to have other staff in the building that can help when there are folks that aren't in the building,
right,
for whatever reason.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Bridget. Excellent. Well, thank you.
Thank you very much.
I think, Valerie, with that
Yes.
intro that Bridget just gave you, I think you have your work cut out for you. So the bar is set.
You don't think I'll be bored?
Oh, no, I'm not. I don't think you're going to be bored, but welcome.
We're very excited.
Yeah, excellent.
Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you
everybody.
very much. Have a nice night. Thank
Thank
you.
you both.
Thank you all.
So next on our agenda, we have public input and members updates. Do we have anyone for public input?
Joe, any hands?
Currently, there are no hands raised for public input.
Okay, great. So we'll go on to member updates. I'll start with Mr. Glavy.
Hey, I'll play the role that's oftentimes played by Joe Knox here in praising the highway department on our recent storm. And I have a very specific example. Last night, while sitting on my couch watching the Super Bowl at about 10:30 at night, I heard a noise outside and I looked, and sure enough, it's the town's sidewalk plower. And whoever the poor person was, I guess they weren't a football fan or mad at Brady for leaving or whatever, but they were out there doing a wonderful job at 10 o'clock, 10:30 on a Sunday night, plowing the sidewalks. I think I'm the only board member who has a sidewalk in front of the house, town sidewalk anyway, but it was impressive. It didn't need to happen then, but it was ready for everybody in the morning. And we get a lot of walkers, a lot of joggers, and you get, when the time's appropriate, kids going to school too. Well, that was, probably wouldn't have gone noticed by a lot of folks, but I noticed it.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Glavy. Mr. Knox?
Two things quickly. I want to wish a member of the Board of Health, Gino Fratelloni, good health. He had an operation recently, and I think he's at home right now. I wish him the best. And our friend Ed Sweeney's, who makes all kinds of donations to the town, he had some heart problems. He's just getting back to work right now. And to tell you a story about the COVID, for him to get his COVID shot, he drove 2 hours to North Adams to have it done. So I wish them both the best.
Wow, great. Thank you. Mr. Nordhaus?
Thank you. I guess it's a good thing we approved that appropriation for the highway department a couple weeks ago, huh? So I attended the COA Housing Vision Subcommittee meeting last week, and the COA, and Joe and I, Joe Layden and I both attended the COA meeting today, and we presented the station area presentation to the COA. They, I think the COA tends to be one of the most well-informed boards in town. Some of the station area report came as a surprise to them. And I think that maybe because they weren't included at the outset. The housing subcommittee has a very specific knowledge of various options in neighboring towns. They know about the pros and cons. They've been looking into it. They've been going on fact-finding trips and contacting management companies to see if they can talk to people who live there. I think their knowledge and input will be invaluable. So just going forward, I want to make sure that that they're included in these types of groups. I don't want to hear it talking about what the seniors want when they can be in the room and they're perfectly capable of speaking for themselves. I think our job is to listen and collaborate, and making sure that they have a seat at the table at these board and committee meetings that discuss senior housing is a really good way to foster collaboration between boards.
Great, thank you. So I do not have anything to share this evening, but I see that we have the next agenda item is the LLB Space Needs presentation, and I see that we have the LLB team on the call. Is Mr. DeCoste joined us? I know he was going to be possibly late.
He's not yet.
Okay, all right, great. So I think we're ready for that presentation. We have Brian Valentine, Brian Fors, Susan DeSalvo, and Drayton Fair on the call. And so do you want to give the history, Anthony, or do you want me to?
Why don't you, Madam Chair, go ahead.
Okay, sure. So as the board knows, and many people I'm sure that are on the public realizes, is that we've been working on the space needs for the town departments for quite some time now. The focus of the board really has been trying to find a suitable location for what I'm going to call a senior center. Although that term and term for the facility itself remains to be seen. We really need to come up with a different way to describe exactly what we want that building to encompass is for our community. So there's a comprehensive report that's going to be presented tonight. So I don't want to get into too much detail, but I think we've really done a lot of homework and diligence, and we've kind of really looked at all of possibilities in the town of Littleton for a location for a senior center. And I really appreciate the patience and the hard work of LLB for continuing to work with myself and Selectman DeCoste on this project. So I'm not going to dive into too much more detail, but I think I'll just lead it off. I see, I don't know if Brian's going to take the lead on this.
I'll take the lead on it. Thanks for having us this evening and being able to talk with you further about what we've been hard at work on. We're very excited about it. I'm going to share my screen and hopefully you all can see the Littleton Town Building and Space Needs Study slide with the Shattuck Street. Yeah? Mm-hmm. Great. So as Cindy mentioned, or Cynthia has mentioned, there's a history here of looking at the space needs for the Shattuck Street property. All of the Parks and Recs Department, EHS, COA, we looked at all the town admin and school department needs as well. This occurred over a series of interviews. We talked with directors and staff as a part of the process to determine exactly what they had, what they needed, and what they wanted. And we categorized that throughout all of the typologies. And tonight we're going to focus in on the program analysis, existing needs and wants of the Elder and Human Services. So what you see here is a graphic bar representing the darker red of 6,808 square feet. That's what they currently utilize in their current building on Shattuck Street. Again, going back to the presentation or the interview process that we did and subsequent programming meetings, we very quickly identified needs and wants. You can see nearly doubling the square footage. The wants were some things that would be idealized, but quite frankly, weren't necessary upon further discussion. So we were able to keep the program a little bit closer in line with the 13,000 square foot mark. As a part of this focus, we were asked to look at 36 King Street in Littleton, Mass., which I'm sure most of you are familiar with, the Indian Hill Music Center. It's a 3-story structure, existing structure, that has a elevator, stairs, a multi-purpose space, and offices, and houses classrooms for music students. This is its location relative to the school. This is an overview of the existing first floor plan. There's a long portico that leads you from an upper leveled parking lot down past the multi-purpose space into an enlarged vestibule, an open common area, reception, admin, offices, student classrooms along the outside, a larger multi-purpose room, little kitchenette and restrooms, another small staff restroom, a intermediate conference room, kitchen. This is that great hall, the stage, support space, and then an annex building that's accessible off of that portico. It does have a lower level. I mentioned it was 3 levels. The elevator service that core. Very large room under here. It's windowless. There's no access to daylight. So that was one item that, as we began to test it, we wanted to make sure that we programmed space in there that was consistent with a space not requiring natural light. There's another small program room on the front corner here. There's an access way off the outside edge here, accessible via stairs, 4 or 5 stairs to get you back up to grade. So not accessible. Corner. The upper level, again, serviced via that stair core, another satellite stair that's accessible off that lobby. Brings you up to a series of additional classrooms that kind of surround that core. They're awkwardly shaped, not really idealized for the we'll get into on the next couple of slides. There's another program room on the front, a couple of restrooms, some more classroom space, and then a balcony that overlooks the multi-purpose. And then this is just storage above. Graphs that show kind of the overall existing conditions that we perceived when we visited the site. This is the entry vestibule, first floor reception, some of the typical classrooms, music studios, general admin offices, restrooms, performance hall. This is that lower level stair that you can see through that doorway, 4 or 5 steps to get you back up. So it's not really accessible. If this were to be turned into a senior center, that would definitely need to be addressed. Another thing in the lower level studio that you can see is the window height. It's not idealized for office setup. This is that lower level large storage area that is 0 daylight capability to it. The second floor hallway volume is nice, but again, this now turns itself into a 3-story building. And again, a second floor studio, very long and narrow rooms, not really ideally set up for offices. And then the window sill height up around 48 inches. We did do code analysis, and we do have a subsequent building report, which we're not going to be presenting tonight because it's 150 odd pages. But we did identify the original building type and use, and along with the performance hall addition. And it's important for for us and our code, our engineers to understand the code implications of potentially changing the use of the building over from what it's currently being used as, which is a school, over to a music school, over to a senior center. The implications I'll note later. The proposed occupancy count was around 200 people, and that occupancy count affects the plumbing. So the existing building has around 11 fixtures. We would be proposing around 15, so we would need to add fixtures in order to accommodate, the senior center use. There is existing sprinkler system throughout. The inefficiencies that we found as it related strictly to the use of an EHS senior center was the infrastructure items were not really suited for EHS use group. Our engineers found a few upgrades that were required because of the code use, right? The code definition of the use of the building over to the seniors. The existing square footage was much larger than EHS required. The building overall was 26,000 square feet, almost 27,000 square feet. Again, it was all over three levels, which came out of our programming exercise would be difficult from an operations and staffing perspective to actually facilitate utilizing that building. And again, we did identify a number not particularly ideal for the elderly, where some office music school, it's a different use. They did not want windows when they designed and built that structure. And so there are a few off that lack windows entirely. This was a program study that we on the
I think you keep freezing, Brian.
and the spaces. And so we, test fit this in here: reception, DHS director office, assistant, staff break room, program room, couple of offices, lobby, waiting, breakout space, program, expanded kitchen. That was one of the infrastructure items that was not a positive here, is that we would need to really supplement the sewer. The sewer capacity is overcapacity as is for a school. That has a lower flow rate than the intended EHS senior center would. So that would require infrastructure dollars to, correct. We had the multi-purpose room, which we were also using potentially for dining, and then some rented space on the outside annex. The lower level, again, because it doesn't have daylight, and programmatically wise, from a space perspective, the fitness room really was the only program that fit down there, but that's not really great use of the space. Currently, the multi-purpose room, I wouldn't even call it a fitness room, it is in Shattuck Street, is also in the basement. Colonnade spaced out to support the gymnasium floor above. So moving from one.
Brian, I think you froze.
To be regraded and addressed in order to have that be accessible.
Sorry, Madam
Chair. On the upper story.
Could we go back a bit? Because I'm sorry, Brian, your internet connection keeps flaking out, and
it does. Okay.
I
may ask Suzanne to. I will stop sharing and see if she can pull the slides up.
Yeah. You just froze a couple times. It's okay.
I'll give Suzanne a minute to.
Okay. And I see that Selectman DeCoste joined us as well. Good evening.
Joe, do you have that presentation that we can pull it up and you can run it through for Brian?
Yeah, I've asked Suzanne. I'm not sure, Drayton, are you able to pull it up potentially?
I think I probably can.
Okay, great.
Everybody see that?
Yep.
Yep.
So it will go. So I didn't know if you wanted to go back to the lower level or the upper.
I did. Yeah, I think that's because that's where we left off. And I just wanted to clarify too, on the lower level, that is the area, there's no windows whatsoever.
That's correct.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, and there was a comment about the gymnasium floor that I just heard the end of. That would be where.
Sure. So what I was referring to is the existing Shattuck Street property where EHS utilizes that lower level right now. That's also for the most part windowless, other than the door that extends right outside with that steep kind of ramp there. So you'd kind of be moving from one dark basement level into another dark basement level, which for the use group really isn't ideal. So that was referring to that comment. There were large 2-foot diameter at Shattuck Street concrete columns that support the gymnasium floor above, and that impacts also how easily adjustable that space can be from a multi-purpose perspective. It limits the amount of seating that can be in there. It limits the amount of view points, really, if you were to utilize, say, the space on the sides and you're trying to provide a presentation or something, the sight lines get blocked by those columns. So that was the point that I was trying to make, is that the benefit to move over here would be if this is a brand new fitness room, it's all glass, really nice, promoting healthy living, but it's not. It's in a basement. It's in the middle of the building, and it's windowless.
Great. Thank you.
All right.
So this is the second floor slide. I assume that my speaking broke up over this as well. But this was all basically future growth. You can see from the graphic on the side, it was really a lot of the wants. And wants were great, but we really, we're not even targeting close to 27,000 square feet of program, even with the wants. So the building was really almost too much building. You can see there's unprogrammed rooms up in here, quite a bit of them are awkwardly sized for a intended use that we would want it for. They're suitable for Indian Hills, and they have beautiful pianos in there, and I'm sure it's well suited for their needs, but for the needs of the seniors, it was not ideal. Again, this is the second floor. However, we did just look at the lower level and the first floor first. So it's a total of 3 floors. Again, from a staffing perspective, in talking through the programming meetings, that was discussed to be not a positive for using this facility for EHS and COA. So as Cynthia mentioned, we were also looking at Shattuck Street, quite frankly, originally, and circled back to the Shattuck Street site as a continuation of our space needs study. Next slide, Drayton. And what we came up with, and we're pretty excited about it, is proposing a new EHS senior center within this red area. And Drayton, I'm not sure if you can highlight it with your marker. Yes, exactly. An L-shaped facility, and it's situated on the south side of the current Shattuck Street site. And we are excited about its relationship to the brand new library, and how it really can begin to culminate that campus feel over on Shattuck Street and allow the seniors to really utilize some of the new spaces that are being built within the library, and likewise create a destination space for seniors that, quite frankly, they really deserve. The building that they're in right now, that I'm sure you're all familiar with, is disjointed and has been modified over quite a number of years, and that makes utilizing those spaces hard and difficult to try to manipulate. And it's kind of like a take the program and get it into this size box, even if this size box isn't the most appropriately sized. And what you see on the upper portion of the site in red is the most appropriately sized, in our opinion, needs of the program that we walked away from hearing. Can you go to the next slide, please? Nope, too fast.
Yeah. Very sensitive.
So this is just an enlarged view of our proposed EHS COA Center floor plan. There's a covered portico that we're proposing off of the drive, new entry vestibule into an enlarged lobby breakout space, a new receptionist area, and admin support directly behind, with a locked access for off hours or after or evening use, rather, really to allow the public not to really gain access to those spaces after hours. There are 2 companion toilets which would be accessible to some of the program rooms, which are to the west of that. Those west-facing program spaces we envision have a lot of really great natural light looking out over the fields. Again, the lobby breakout space could spill out and potentially be utilized for other events that dictate that. Again, a lot of natural light out that view. We come into another multi-purpose space here, which could be used for arts and crafts. It could be used for classroom space. There are quite a number of things that we see this being utilized for. Then there is an enlarged multi-purpose room, which is dividable. So we can divide it down if the program were to have 2 separate individual functions going on at the same time, or we pull that wall back and we are allowed to utilize the entire space. And this room, as we mentioned, really would have a lot more natural lighting, which is very, very good for the seniors. Servicing this multi-purpose space would be a great kitchen space, utilizing some of the equipment that you have and some new equipment, along with a medical space off of that building, and then 2 companion toilets. This is a left-hand side.
Sorry.
Left-hand side view is a drone shot that we took of Shattuck Street, looking at the rear side of the site, the west side. That's the hill that is where we're kind of proposing our building. The right-hand side is a 3D axonometric view that we took, represents what that structure might begin to look like and how it relates to the library and the language that was created and developed there, and allow this new facility to complement this edge of the site. This is a turned view, just kind of spinning around and providing a little bit more visual representation of the access of the roof line in order to allow and kind of complement that site. One more, so that's okay.
Very sensitive. Sorry about that.
One more, Drayton, please.
How about 2?
That's fine. That's fine. This is kind of an axon spin that we did. This was an axon spin, and Drayton's actually doing it very proactively, taking us through the slides quick like that. But it's kind of spinning you through, showing you what the building would look like from various perspectives. And we'll finish on, thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Brian, and thank you, Drayton, as well. So, like I had mentioned at the beginning, this has been a project in progress for quite some time now. So when this proposal came back to the Space Needs Group, we were pretty excited about this location. It wasn't something that we had visualized before. And so, certainly it's a good fit being able to have the seniors on the Shattuck Street campus, utilize, the new library in town offices. And plus, there is the project going on next door, which is a senior residential development. Having that in close proximity to this building is exciting as well. And the walking trail component that's being proposed too, with the connectivity to Castle and the Trees. There's just so much potential with this location and this site. And I do want to emphasize, we keep calling it a senior center. I really think the select board needs to put our heads together and kind of come up with another label or name for this building, because it is EHS. It does serve many different people in our community other than just seniors. So we really should, focus on reflecting that. But I just do want to emphasize this is, the first glance at this. We haven't, as a select board, really gotten a look at this yet and had a collective discussion about this proposal. So that's the first step in this process here tonight, while we have our architect team before us. So I'm going to open it up to the board. Maybe I'll start with Mr. DeCoste because I know he might have a time restraint. And then we can hear from other members of the board just to get their initial thoughts.
Thanks, Cindy. I appreciate that. And I'm going to jump here as soon as I give just a couple of words. First of all, thanks very much to LLB, because this has been very much a work in progress, as you mentioned, Cindy. And we've thrown a lot at these guys. We looked at space needs at Shattuck Street and put them through the ringer on that. And then we brought them up to Great Road and said, what can we do with this building? And then we said, we'll pivot. Let's take a look at the Indian Hill building. And so we've been going back and forth. And all the while, they've really remained on course. And throughout the whole process, they've sought the input of all the interested stakeholders. And it's been a pleasure to work with them. So I do appreciate all that they've done, all that, Cindy and Joe Layden, and, even throw a little bit of a shout out to Anthony here. Ashley certainly has had a lot to do with this. We've got
Right.
the previous Liz Tretiak and even the interim. And Laurie, no, Anthony, gonna have to bail me out on her name.
Jamie Detner?
Jamie, I'm sorry. Yes, Jamie,
Right.
who was filled in for us and been a great resource for us, and she's given us some good insight as well. So thank you to everybody who's kind of put all hands on deck and really we've thrown a lot against the wall. Ed Mullen from the building inspector or commissioner's perspective has offered a lot of input and insight. Building on the side of the hill, at the back of the parking lot there, we have a very good perspective with the library going through that exact same process right on the same site, essentially. I mean, that's not to say that, if we did decide to go forward with this site, which I hope we do, that we wouldn't run into something different as far as the soils are concerned. But in all likelihood, I would guess that we're going to be probably in better shape because the slope and the topography is a little bit better to deal with than what the library had to deal with. So I do hope that we can get this to the next, if we're carrying the ball, to use the Super Bowl metaphor, get the next first down to be able to bring something to town meeting and put something before the residents and find out if we can make this happen. I really feel as though this is something that we do owe the seniors. The seniors have certainly stepped up and been supportive of any and all projects that were brought before them. And it is time to step up and make them whole, if you will. And I'm excited about the possibilities of bringing something generally like was just presented on that location forward to town meeting. And, so we could if we can get funding within a year and we can get into the ground next summer, we could have an active EHS center or Littleton Center or Shattuck Center or whatever we call it. We could have something to
be proud of. And Brian brought up the whole campus. We had talked a lot about a campus idea, maybe the Morgan property, and there were a lot of ideas that were kind of bandied about, but this kind of brings that back into the focus for us. And there's the opportunity for the seniors to be on the Shattuck Street campus, which was a lot of what we heard from a lot of the focus groups and a lot of the input that we got from the seniors. Again, there's an EHS center, if you will. So we do need to meet all of the human services needs, but the lion's share of the use is in fact as a senior center. So I'm excited about where we're at. I hope that we are able to bring something forward that has a little more detail pretty soon, and hopefully we'll have something for town meeting so that we can go to the voters and say this is something that's been long on the back burner, and it's time for it to come forward.
Right. Great. Thank you, Mr. DeCoste. Mr. Ansali, how old is Shattuck Street?
The oldest part of Shattuck Street was where the COA is currently, EHS is currently, and I believe that was 1932.
Paul?
And Paul.
I know my parents both went to school there, but it was the high school when my mother graduated from there. Dad too, I think.
I left
Joe
off of that one.
Well, I'm sure his father probably went to school there too, didn't he, Joe?
He's muted. Yeah. No,
Get
just
Joe in there to help you.
Joe, you're muted.
Yeah, he's muted. But just to build on what Mr. DeCoste was saying, as far as back as 2014, there's been talk about making space for the seniors and meeting their needs. So it's a very much long overdue project. So I'm personally excited about this, and I just want to hear from members of the board as well. So I'll start with Mr. Glavy. Do you have any comments?
I'm tickled by what I see. I'm very excited, and all the key points have been touched on, and I won't belabor them. For a lot of reasons, I think folks with the hand in the process wanted to make sure everybody's voice was heard, and there remains some debate on, the whole community center versus senior center and all that, and then the whole, well, what's the best location for a thing? And boy, we could spin in circles on that forever, but I applaud Cindy, you, and Chuck, for taking the lead on this in a very difficult year. When it had been kind of bogged down a little bit, and even during COVID and high level turnover, to bring this back to work with LLB and bring this kind of proposal forward. I'm excited about it, and I think everybody should be appreciative. I'd say push it over the finish line. And my more detailed comments probably reflect on the financing, so I'll hold off on that. I know some seniors who noticed this on the agenda had reached out to me. I imagine every member got some level of input, but I don't know if there's any, after the board members comment, whether there's anybody in the waiting room that's looking to speak to this or not. But one person indicated they might, but I don't want to flush anybody out if they're not looking to do that at this point. But in any event, great work. Look forward to seeing it move forward.
Great, thank you. Mr. Knox, do you have any comments?
Just quickly, you mentioned 2014. This was actually a topic that's been pushed back, that kicked down the road. We've always found a reason that it wasn't going to be done. I am so excited that we've reached this point. Everyone involved, from LLB to the people from the town that have worked on this, you don't know how excited people are about this, that it's finally going to come true, or hopefully come true. And thanks for the work. I think that the sizing of it fits. And when we get a little bit further, I think looking at the design right here, maybe we can adjust some of the parking, because that's always going to be an issue. But as far as everything else, I'm so positive about this, and hopefully everything moves forward. And once again, thanks everyone for everything they've done to make this work out. I've been on the board a long, long time, and it's been pushed down too long. And now it's good. It's actually going to happen. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Mr. Nordhaus?
I'm also just terrifically excited to see something tangible in front of us for the first time. I'm going to be officially a senior in 5 years, so we have a deadline. You need to get it done. One thing that I think might bear a little bit of conversation is I think people often feel they can't believe that it would actually be more efficient to build than to renovate. And I'm sure that you may not have done any sort of exhaustive look at it, but I know that you've probably thought about the cost analysis of building a brand new building versus renovating a large one, including like ongoing maintenance and energy efficiency. And I wonder if you could just speak to that a little bit to forestall some of the questions that we're going to get later on.
Sure. So I'll actually turn that over. I don't know if Brian or Drayton want to speak to that.
Sure.
As Chuck had mentioned, we did look at, 2 other properties, the Indian Hill property and then the property on Great Road, which turned out to not be a good fit for a variety of reasons, but I'll let Brian elaborate on that.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, there are quite a number of inefficiencies that we found. As I mentioned, we've been working with the town for over a year at least on multiple options for multiple properties. We evaluated the programming effort for all of the town departments that exist within the Shattuck Street minus the library, because they were going to be moving forward with that project. But everyone else, all the other departments we met with, we identified, again, the wants, the needs. The existing building, again, it's the efficiency factor that it's extremely lost within that building. It's been renovated over the years. It is not sprinklered. It's multi-leveled. It's inefficient in the existing exterior envelope compared to today's technologies. A lot of the HVAC equipment that supports that needs to be oversized in order to compensate for that lack of efficiency. It's not sprinklered, quite frankly, and when you get over a certain square footage per building code, the entire building would need to be brought up for sprinkler coverage. And as you can well imagine, that's quite an undertaking to do within an existing building. And that's just one of the trades. There's also electrical, fire alarm, IT, plumbing. So when you start to look at all those different trades, along with just the energy efficiency aspect of it, and then space efficiency aspect of it, it becomes pretty costly pretty quick. We did do that. The town does or will be receiving, I believe, our kind of final packages for all the work that we've completed, most likely by the end of this month. And but to kind of close the loop, building a new, energy efficient building with more modern equipment and controls that can be controlled via the internet, so that if there is an issue, it can be adjusted. It's in the long-term interest of the town, the right way to go, in our opinion.
Thank you. That's awesome. And I appreciate the talking points. It's exactly what I need to say to someone who asks me that question. I appreciate your attention to that.
You're welcome.
Great. Thanks, Brian. So do we have anyone, Mr. Layden or Mr. Ansaldi, on the call that wanted to make a comment or question?
Anybody would like to speak, if they raise a hand, we have a hand raised. Marge Payne, want to let her in, Joe, or open her up?
Good evening, Marge. Hi.
Good evening. This is very exciting. I'm almost emotional over it. So, but I have a couple of questions. Just out of curiosity, that large room, the one that could be divided off, what would be the total capacity in that room for, close to the capacity if you would have it in as one large room? Do you think?
I personally don't have that number in front of me. I don't know if Suzanne has that number in front of her. She's on the call, but it doesn't look like she was able to get to it before. It's still pretty early on in our study, and it would depend on whether there are tables and chairs in the room, or if it's standing room only. So those are two factors that we need to take into account when providing a square footage, count per person, really. Hey, Sue.
Hey there.
I don't know if you have that number that Marge is asking for, or a rough idea.
It would be for the large functions with tables and chairs. I was just curious. Right now, we're using, the space we're using in Shattuck Street. And
Yes.
that space looks a lot larger. From the drawing, I thought it looked larger. I was just curious.
Yeah, it looks like it would be about 165, and that might change as we continue to discuss things.
It's probably over 100, you're thinking?
I think about 165.
Oh, okay, that would be great. So, and then I know Joe Knox mentioned the parking issue. I'm not too clear on where the parking all is going to be.
We're still working through that. Oh, sorry. Yep. Go ahead.
No, you can go ahead, Brian. Yeah.
I was just going to say that we're still working through all that. We've very thoughtfully and carefully situated this building on the site to maintain that campus-like feel. And parking is always, parking and traffic are the two things that most influence people, or tend to most influence people. We're still going to have to study that to really maximize parking on the site. But there's a couple opportunities, I think, that our landscape and civil engineers can come up with creatively.
Oh, okay. Just curious about that because that's a big piece of thing. I mean, we have vans that have to get parked, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah. And I know that currently we have over 100 people when we have a large function in that Shattuck Street space, and we've turned people away. So we need a good sized multi-purpose space. You're right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Marge,
You're
happy
welcome,
birthday.
Marge.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday, Marge.
Wow, happy birthday.
I feel infamous in this town now. Thank you. Thank you all.
Yeah, no, so, and I think it's important just to emphasize with the public as well that this is just an initial design that we're showing tonight. It's definitely a fluid project. And certainly the footprint might change, minor or significantly as we go through the process. And certainly parking is something that we've been discussing and we'll take into consideration as we move forward. Are there any other hands raised?
One more hand raised, Madam Chair. It's Mark Rambacher.
Good evening, Mark.
Hi, Mark Rambacher, Hartwell Ave, also on the COA. Do we have an idea of the square footage of this new building?
Cindy, do you want me to? So what came out of the study, Mark, is we really are ranging roughly between 13.5 and kind of 15,000 is really the gross square footage that kind of responds fully to the needs of the EHS and COA at this point. That's kind of what we found.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, thank you. And I'm involved with the COA and on the space needs for the COA. So anything we can do to help, just reach out to us. So thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, Mark. Any other questions or comments?
None, Madam Chair.
Okay, great. Well, again, thank you very much for your hard work on this. As Chuck pointed out, I feel like we kind of had you ping-ponging all over Littleton trying to find a solution to meet our space needs for the seniors. And I think we're really excited. I know Suzanne had mentioned that when we first had the discussion about this site. And I woke up the next day and I was like, wow, I really think we're onto something with this. So I know I'm excited to see this project move forward from this point. It's taken a long time, and I think this is the closest that we've come to bringing something like this to fruition. So thank you all for your hard work and continued hard work on this project. And we'll see in the coming weeks what we can put together, and hopefully we'll get something going forward for town meeting in May or in the fall. So.
Great. Well, thanks for your hard work too, because it wasn't one-sided. That's definitely all the input that we've got. And the meetings, that was important.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Have a great night. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Good night.
Good night. Okay, so now, next on the agenda, Anthony, looks like we're going to discuss financing options.
So, Madam Chair, it's exciting to see that. Now it's, how do we pay for something like that? So I asked our finance team to present options and be able to talk to them tonight on what something like that might be. And based on the price per square foot of the library, adding in for some escalation costs, we're looking at, and it's our best guesstimate, is $650 a square foot. When you talk about a 15,000 square foot building, it easily adds up to getting close to $10 million. When you build a building for $10 million, 10% is design costs. So, or up to 10% is design costs. So it could be up to $1 million just to get through the design to the point where we're bidding out construction docs and so forth. So just using those numbers as a starting point, our team put together some financing options, and our treasurer slash collector, Sean O'Brien's going to talk us through his presentation.
Good evening, Sean. How are you?
Good evening. Good. How are you?
Good.
All right. Let me share my screen here. Let's see. Okay. So tonight I'm going to walk you through of our senior center financing plan that a lot of the information can be found in the memo that accompanied it. So this will touch on the high level points from that. So as Anthony pointed out, we're estimating around $10 million for the project, roughly 10% design cost for that. We have $3 million in the senior center capital stabilization fund. In this model, we've used the $3 million up front. That'll help to reduce future interest costs. So we're really looking at financing around $8 million over 20 years. 20 years is usually a good amount to go by for buildings, because after that point, you'll end up having to put most likely more money into it in repairs and updates. I also checked with our financial advisor, and we're thinking for an issuance this size, an interest rate of 2.8% should be conservative and something to budget off of. Based on the information that we just went over, on the left-hand side, you can see a debt service schedule, assuming level principal to reduce interest expense. So our total cost estimate would be around $10.3 million between principal and interest. And then on the right, there's our current outstanding debt service in our future years. And then the orange bar at the top reflects the marginal impact of that debt service, starting in year one at $624,000. We also included an excluded debt scenario. Excluded debt is basically debt on top of the property tax levy, and ran a model of what would that be like for the tax levy. And you can see that on the right, where excluded debt, net excluded debt is around 1.2 million. This would be the 624 on top of that. For the impact to the residential and commercial markets, based on the FY21 levy, we forecasted out that would be 26 cents per thousand for the residential, and the commercial, industrial, and personal property markets, that's 40 cents per thousand. So another way to look at that is the grid below, where we have the single family home assessed value for 21, and then the approximate tax impact. Now, this is good just to get an idea of the scale of any sort of debt exclusion. So it's just more of a modeling practice as a point of reference. Following that, I think the big takeaway from the capital planning side is, as we've kind of talked about, there's you know, a lot of town needs in terms of cash capital, and we can see that in the blue bar and what we're actually budgeting to spend on in the green. I think that lends to the option of, you know, possibly financing some more of these projects. As you can see with the debt roll off of about a couple $100,000 each year until we get closer to FY30. So with our debt service and operations, this is looking ahead to FY24 when we most likely permanently finance the project. We have excluded debt in that purple, making up a third. Inside debt levy, about half, 52%, and then the senior center of how we'd want to finance that with that remaining 15%. I think the good thing is when we're really looking at the town's finances, we have the capacity to take on more debt, and based on how we forecast our budget going forward, I think we're at a level, as you can see on the graph on the right, where our debt as a percent of operating budget is well under 10. Rating agencies look favorably upon that. So it's really a matter of kind of weighing the pros and cons of excluding the debt or funding within the levy. Funding it within the levy provides you know, relief to taxpayers, but it also makes it more difficult to, you know, address those competing capital priorities, whereas excluding it gives you a little bit more financial flexibility, but there needs to be that full-on community support and behind that project to pay for it. So some kind of decision points are I think it's important to, you know, discuss and analyze what method works best for the board and the town, weigh those pros and cons for each, come up with a timeline so that we can kind of successfully capital plan going forward. So we can prioritize what we need and then make those recommendations. So I really wanted to lay out those data points so that we could have, you know, a thoughtful discussion on that. So obviously it's still early in the process, but, you know, happy to go through any parts of it with everyone. So.
Okay. Great. Thank you, Sean. So I'll just start off. I mean, I think a debt exclusion for this project just personally to me is not an option. The seniors, you know, are strained enough financially. I just don't, personally, I'm not in favor of a debt exclusion to give them a senior center that they've been waiting for many, many years. To me, just doesn't seem fair. One of the things that I do appreciate in the presentation, Sean, and thank you very much for the time in putting this all together. I really think that we do need to come up with some sort of project pipeline. And I believe that Mr. Ansaldi may have already spoken to Cheryl about this, but we really need to get a grasp on these projects, these large projects, and where they're at and what's coming down the line. Because I always feel like every time we come up with a project, you know, like a senior center, someone else jumps up and they says, oh, well, wait a minute, we need to do this. And I think a lot of that is the reason why, you know, this project's never really come to fruition. And it's all about planning and really having a good grasp about what is coming down the road, especially when you look at the projections that Sean just presented. You know, what exactly is that impact on the community? So I think if we can, you know, continue to work on that and have a better visual for the, you know, for the boards and for the public as well, it will be really helpful. But I do appreciate having all this information, and, you know, certainly as we go through the budget process, this discussion will have to continue about, you know, how we can do this and make it work and do what's financially best for the community as a whole. So Those are my thoughts. I don't know if there's any other questions or comments from other board members.
Madam Chair, if I may.
Sure.
Ms. Sean, I have a couple questions. On the debt exclusion slide that you showed us, were you assuming just a percentage of the total was going to be excluded, or the whole, everything that we borrow was going to be excluded? Or, well, you know what I mean?
Yeah. So basically with that model, it's the 3 million off the top from the stabilization fund, and then the full exclusion. So that 624 amount running until 20 years.
And then another question was the slide on the capital, expected capital expenditures over the next 4 years. Could you just give us a very high level of what what's coming up and what the big rocks in there are?
So on the debt side or the cash capital side?
Well, so the slide that was like expected capital expenses over the next 4 fiscal years versus what we have to spend.
Oh, okay.
I'm curious what you included in the expected.
Yeah, so we had that's all from our capital plan. So I'm kind of happy to share that. There's a lot of projects on there, but some bigger ticket ones too. But I just don't have that
vehicles and all that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, so Matthew, if I may, when we go through the budgeting process, we ask departments to put out 5 years ahead, 5 years looking forward of capital projects. To Cindy's point earlier, and it's something that I'd like to definitely work on, and Cheryl and I have discussed this, is really going out with a 10-year plan and really planning for those, for buildings and things that you have to talk about, as much as we don't want to talk about it because they're a lot of money, but you have to start putting in a placeholder somewhere for, at least for planning purposes. So, so for the next the 5 years that Sean referenced was part of the FY22 budgeting process that department submitted.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, great. Any other questions or comments from members of the board? Mr. Glady?
I'm always good for one on this topic. Once again, I didn't jump in earlier because I was hearing what what I was hoping to hear. And before I get into any of the substance of it, I'll tell you, in the 10 years since Cheryl has been here, and in the short tenure that Sean has been here, the visual presentation, the verbal presentation of the numbers in such a way that you can grasp them has been terrific, and I appreciate what you folks do. And I'll tell you that the turnaround is pretty fantastic too. Cheryl knows what this afternoon I sent her an email asking some pointed, detailed stuff that I never expected to see before the week's end, and I got it before the meeting started. So that's terrific. In fact, that's kind of where I'm going to go with some of this. Where all the right things are being focused on, but I'll tell you, I'm bullish on this, not only because we're in a good place right now, but historically, we've used debt under the levy limit to stabilize the budget. It's not all negative. There's a positive in there. It's the part that doesn't have a growth factor attached to it. It more, amortizes over time. It goes down. So it allows other things like personnel, and I'm saying this, I guess, through the board to the town as a whole, to grow bigger. And right now, in the current proposed budget that we're looking at, we're adding about, $250,000 in new FTEs of some form or another across about a dozen departments. So, we're meeting the department's needs while meeting the capital needs and not adding any additional burden beyond what they're going to get anyway to the taxpayers. So, it served us well. The town offices that some of you folks are sitting in right now were financed under the levy limit. The biggest one was, of course, the high school project, track, alumni field, in recent years, fire station, library. And I'll make this point too. We can't always do it. And sometimes, when there's too much in the pipeline all at the same time, we did the high school, the middle school rather, and the police station outside the levy, and I was on board with both of those. So it's not just a reflexive position on my part. I just think as a matter of ongoing good planning is the key word. You're right, Madam Chair, in that, and I know that this is a big focal point of Anthony's, but we're on the right track, and it's the correct questions are being asked, as Matthew did too. What's coming down the pipeline? I know there's been talk from the school department about, what's next up is probably Shaker Lane again, and we need to start getting a lot better grip on where these things are and how things prioritize against each other and all that. But in the short term, the fact that were we to fund this entirely under the levy limit, that the high water mark for debt as a percent of operating budget seems to be fiscal year 24, and that's over 7 but under 8% under the current modeling. That, if that's a concern of yours, that's as high as we get, and I don't think that's too bad. And then if you follow that trend line, it starts tracking down again as it would with debt coming off the books, and that's where we start getting other projects. So I referenced earlier in the presentation from LLB and Cindy and Chuck and those folks on the project itself that I got 2 calls from seniors, and it's funny, they maybe because they knew where I was coming from anyways, but both of them had the same message, and one said they might get on the call tonight. It's great if you want to give a senior center to the seniors, but it's pretty ironic if you give them a tax increase at the same time when that's the number one issue they're facing. So I'd say we I don't want to put blinders on to important information if it runs counter to this, but I would encourage us to take an approach that if we can do it that way and the numbers continue to work, let's make that part of our plan and double down on a commitment to do better longer term planning so we can feel comfortable when these things come up that we're not staring into a void.
Right. I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Glady. And I'm going to just throw something out there because I know it's coming. And I don't know if Cheryl and Sean can answer this or if it's a better question for Kathy Miller, but there's some panic about town because IBM is up for lease. And I've just heard some buzz from people that are, how is that going to impact us, our revenues as a community, and as our budget as a whole? And I just don't know if either one of you can speak to that or if that's more of a question for the assessor's office. But if you had any quick response to that, it might be helpful.
Sure, Madam Chair, I can take that quickly. If IBM at this point, it's a lease, and so the taxes are the taxes, and so the owner of that building, if they should leave, then have to go through the abatement process, like anyone else would have to. So it's not like IBM leaves and then suddenly that tax revenue dries up, and so it's not an instantaneous change. That being said, if they leave and then the building doesn't get repurposed, which it very well could, and there has been some discussions, I believe, already about that spot being desirable from industrial standpoint. But if, and that's a big if, that didn't happen as well, ultimately, if that came off the tax rolls entirely, which again is, very, could be very unlikely, then at that point, you have less commercial property taxes, and so it then shifts over to the residential tax base. But again, I want to preface that with the fact that, that would take quite some time, and that spot is desirable to other types of businesses. So I hope that alleviates anyone's fears if they're hearing those rumors.
Right. Thank you very much, Cheryl. I appreciate that explanation. That was
Madam
helpful.
Chair,
Thank you.
If I could jump in, Madam Chair,
Sure.
the assessed value for 550 King Street is $66 million. So the if we back into what our commercial rate is times, I guess 660,000, 66,000 times whatever the rate is, because it's per thousand, right? It's a significant amount. 16.75 million, no, 1.675 maybe. I'm not that good at math. I'm pretty tired. But it's more than $1.5 million in tax revenue that we receive from that. They're essentially our largest payer in taxes. So it certainly could be impactful. And like I'm sure all the members got some level of text messages and phone calls and emails about that, and pictures. I got a few pictures on my text of the lease sign. So we all, we have to be aware of that, and I'm sure that with the town administrator talking to their, there's, I forget the name of the gentleman that is the principal that we typically would speak to over there for these matters, but we definitely need to be aware of it. But you know, it goes back to the whole thing that you and Paul and all of us have been saying. It's planning. You know, if we go into things blindly and we're not, you know, we've been talking about Dover Saddlery, the possibility of Dover Saddlery leaving and losing that $125,000, I think it is, in tax revenue from them for their building. You know, we need to be aware of all those types of things and try to work with our economic development committee and different groups to try to, in the business community, to try to make sure that we fill any of the commercial spaces that we have. So just getting back to the financing and all of the senior center, I agree with what all of you have said, and I think that it is high time. And Paul, I couldn't have said it better. You know, it's the number finally comes up for the seniors, and we make them pay for it through the nose. So.
All right, great. Thank you. Any other questions or comments from members of the board?
If I just have one very brief one. You know, one of the things that's nice about having a AAA bond rating is having a low interest rate when you borrow money. So maybe we shouldn't be too afraid of, and as Mr. Glavy said, 7%, that's fine, especially if it's being borrowed at 2.8. Thank you. That's all.
Okay, great. All right, thanks. So thank you, Sean. Thank you, Cheryl, very much for the presentation and your input. So Anthony, what should we do? Where do we want to go from here?
There was one other point on Sean's slide when he talked about there's about $80,000 in other capital projects that we'd like to close out and repurpose that towards the design, because how it goes to get through the schematic design now, it's roughly, I'll just go off of that 10 million, $1 million for design. So 10% of that is what it would take us to get through schematic design, somewhere around there. And that's obviously, I think, the high side. So we're running low now, relatively low on our space needs budget. We have $50,000 and we've been cranking away at 2 meetings a week and trying to get to this point. So we will have a capital item to take that $80,000 and repurpose it into the schematic design for the senior center. And then we're also looking to add another capital item to replenish the space needs, because obviously we still have more work to do. So maybe add another $50,000 to the pot for future projects.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay. If there's no other questions or comments, I think we can move on. So thanks again, Sean. Thank you very much, Cheryl. Appreciate your time. Okay, so next on the agenda, we have Town Council Personnel Bylaw Update Presentation. So we have Donna with us.
I just
Hi.
unmuted. Sorry,
How
guys.
are you?
I'm well. How are you all?
Good, thanks.
Good evening. So you should all have before you, it's about approximately 80 pages of a draft personnel bylaw. Policy. The bylaw itself is 4 sections and 1 page. And you'll realize quite quickly that this is quite a change from the current bylaw and the current setup of the town. You should have the memorandum that the cover sheet memorandum that sort of explained why we take this approach, why we recommend that you take this approach. And it's really for a couple of reasons. One, as you know, bylaws are incredibly cumbersome to amend. And with a bylaw, a personnel bylaw as detailed as ours currently is, we quickly run out of sync with current law. So we have sections of the current personnel bylaw that are not in compliance. Secondly, the current thinking on personnel bylaws is as you move to a more professional arrangement, with full-time staff who are experienced and trained in human resources rules and training and practice, then it's no longer preferable that your personnel management gets handled by a bunch of volunteers on a personnel committee. Sometimes you will have experienced volunteers on there who are HR managers, but not always, and certainly not with all of the committee members. So you've got varying experience on there. And when you have that kind of arrangement, you tend to get people who will be making decisions based on the people involved rather than what the law might require. So we're recommending that you change the model so that the personnel bylaw will allow your town administrator, your assistant town administrator, and your HR manager to bring their expertise and professionalism to HR policies and practices, and make your personnel practices and policies much more flexible and responsive to the needs of town hall. That's the overview of what we're looking for there. And I'm happy. I mean, it is 79 pages of different policies. What we did to create this document is we took sections of the current bylaw and moved them into the policy. We also took SelectBoard policies that again were HR directed and put them into this draft handbook. And then we tried to reconcile them when there were differences between them. Then we've also added some policies that some members had said that they wanted to see in the handbook. And so we've provided you with some drafts on that specifically. There was no social media policy, so we have provided you one that we've done for others.
Great. Don, I appreciate that. Thank you. So for the public's information, I think originally our personnel bylaw was created in 1970 something. It was updated once in the 80s. And essentially, you know, what you're saying, Don, is we've outgrown our personnel bylaw just as the town has changed and the community's changed and our staffing needs have changed. So I appreciate you taking a look at this and bringing this report back to the board. I did read the report. I thought it was very helpful and a much more in tune with what we need as a town to operate on a professional and efficient manner to meet our staffing needs and to ensure, like you pointed out, compliance, legal compliance is really important, clearly. And so just trying to reconcile those differences in those gaps, I think is time that we do address those shortfalls and make the corrective measures that we need to do. I did go through the whole report. I do have comments that I wanted to share. I understand that this is, you know, going to be a work in progress and not anything that we're going to resolve or finalize tonight. So I have my comments, but I'm going to maybe turn it over to the board and see if they had any initial thoughts about the presentation and the summary from Donna and the revised document that they wanted to talk about tonight.
Madam Chair, can I ask just a kind of a procedural question?
Mm-hmm.
I have a number of small questions about the policies. I wonder, should we email them? Should we not go over them in this meeting? I mean, I have one kind of big one that I do want to discuss with this group, but
okay. All right, so
how should we handle the smaller feedback, I guess is what I'm asking.
Right. So hold that thought and then let's hear from the other members of the board and just see what their thought process are. And we'll come back to that and figure out how to go forward. Because yeah, I agree with you because I think I'm on the same wavelength as you. So Mr. Glavy, do you have any comments or thoughts?
Yeah, as the board's current representative on the personnel committee, I'm very happy to see this report and appreciate Donna's guidance on this and before I lose this thought, I think at the end of her report or somewhere in the cover letter, she invited folks to send comments to her. So maybe that's the answer to the question of what to do with the smaller issues. But I'll tell you, in the short time I've served since last July on the Personnel Committee, and Selectman Knox, that's my my little friend there. Selectman Knox preceded me for many years on the Personnel Committee. Maybe he has a different or what. I'd be curious to hear his thoughts. But I felt at times some of the issues we were dealing with, as a committee, were things that should be being dealt with in a much more professionalized manner. And the town has, properly made the progression in our staffing to a full-time HR department, and that's appropriate. We've kind of, made the big hurdles on that, jumped those hurdles this past fall, and we, as recently as tonight, we meet one of our new employees there, and that, we kind of turn on the page on having those kinds of issues dealt with, in a somewhat arbitrary manner by, well-intentioned but kind of outdated board personnel committee. So this process is due and welcome, and I support it. We did discuss it. I think a few members of this group were on the Zoom for the last personnel committee meeting we had a month ago. I think there's a realization that this is coming, and I know we're meeting again on Wednesday morning. So, in light of this produced document, and we'll discuss it then. But I don't see there's a lot of room for making minor tweaks and changes towards what's proposed, but the path is clear.
Okay. All right, great. Thank you. Any other board member comments or questions?
I think both Chuck and I have been on this personnel board also. And during the years I was there, I certainly appreciate the work that was put in by those people on those committees, volunteering to be there. And we did have some outstanding people that were in HR that helped me out. But I'm the perfect example of being an amateur and reading through this thing for the first time, and I'm on a committee that deals with this. So although the committee when I was on it was just people who were out there to do what was best for the personnel in the town and for the town itself, I like the idea of the professionalism that someone like myself is lacking, that I couldn't make some of the decisions that other people who have been in this line of work and information for a long period of time. So I welcome this, but at the same time, I certainly want to thank all those people that put all those hours in before.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Knox.
Yeah, I'll echo what Joe just said. Exactly that. This isn't. Although I've been in hiring and managing capacity, the level of professionalism that is really needed. We've now created that opportunity within Littleton. We've got a professional human resources department, and we need to let them, do what they're being paid to do, frankly, and so I think that it's, that's what they're charged with doing. And you brought up the original personnel board was set up in 1974, I think it was, and absolutely necessary at the time. And it's kind of outgrown its effectiveness and or usefulness. And the fact that we've got a professional HR department has it's shown the progress that we've made. But to echo what Joe said, as far as those that have served, and those that serve on any board or committee or in any capacity, it's very much appreciated. But many of us go into these committees not necessarily having the level of expertise in that particular board or committee that we appoint people to, whether it's the cultural council or what have you. And this is a very specific professional service that is provided within most organizations, and we made do for as many years as we did. And it is time, and I very much appreciate the work of my Myers and Harrington, specifically Donna Brewer. So thank you all.
Great, thank you. So now we're going to go back to Mr. Nordhaus. So I mean, I don't know about you, but I think, I have some smaller comments that I can certainly, send over to Donna, but you had mentioned, Matthew, that there was a larger question or comment that you wanted to share and to talk with the board tonight.
Yes, thank you. I will also forward my nitpicks. to Donna, but I want to discuss the work from home policy because I feel that the one that's in here is antiquated. Last year proved our town employees are perfectly capable of running town offices with excellence and efficiency from home. I think as long as offices are staffed during open hours, public-facing employees should rely on the discretion of their supervisor. Diane Dickerson doesn't always need to be at her desk, for example. And before COVID, there was no guarantee you'd catch someone at their desk. Actually, quite often it was harder than it is now. I think appointments are incredibly helpful. So my feeling is the town should continue to strive to provide a modern, family-friendly work environment. And we could simplify this policy a great deal by essentially leaving it up to the discretion of the supervisor.
Okay, thank you. That was on my list as well, the working from home policy, that we need to revisit that. And the way I read it was, it begins that we don't encourage working from home, but because of COVID, we, had to adjust and make some, accommodations for our employees. But I think, to echo what Matthew just said, I think we do need to revisit that as a whole, and provide some flexibility for our employees, especially, times have changed, and if, it's not going to impact their work performance. And if they work things through with their supervisor, I think it's something that the board certainly should consider implementing, and making it more a comprehensive policy. So I didn't know if that's something that we can maybe elaborate on, Donna.
Yes, and I think if you're interested in doing that, then what I'd recommend is that we remove the first paragraph altogether and remove the reference to emergency situations, and then just amend everything thereafter in this section so that basically you are giving department heads the flexibility to determine who and when they can telecommute.
Mm-hmm. Are there any thoughts or comments from the board on that suggestion?
My only concern is that we hire professionals to be our department heads, to manage our departments. If they feel as though the public is being served to the highest standard, then that's something that we trust them to make those decisions. Ultimately it comes down to us, and then we empower Anthony to do that, and then it just kind of follows, it cascades from there. So as long as there is the highest standard for municipal expectations, if someone wants to go in and pay a bill or pull a permit, they should be able to do that during working hours.
Okay.
I'd echo what Chuck said, and not dissimilar from what Matthew indicated earlier. The key phrase I think I heard him say there was the public-facing employees. Leave it to the managers we hire to figure out how to make that happen. We'll know whether it's happening well or not by the feedback we get. And other than that, empower our department heads to do their jobs, and let everybody enjoy their work, and do it in the best setting that they can do it.
Mm-hmm.
I agree 100%.
Okay, great. Thank you. Do we have any hands raised? Anybody from the personnel board on the call?
Let's look. Just one. Anita Harding. Joe, you want to let Anita in?
Hello?
Hi, Anita.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. All I had to say was that we will be meeting on Wednesday on the personnel board, and if there are comments to be made or suggestions that we would like to send to town council to review, may we send them along to you to do that?
Certainly.
Okay, and then we could have an opportunity at some point to talk at another meeting or whatever with you.
Yep. No, I think that's a great idea.
Before the warrant article is finally drafted it. So there's a communication between both boards.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, that's all I would ask.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much.
Sure. So we'll submit our comments to you, Donna, and then you can formulate them and we'll take another stab at this and see what we come back with.
Yes, I encourage everybody to send all their comments, big and little. And on the big comments, I can coordinate with Anthony and Joe and Bridget and try to come back with a recommendation to you.
All right, excellent. Great.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair, one more. I just realized there's language in there about cannabis that I think is no longer appropriate given that it's legal now. Not that obviously, we're not going to condone anything at work, but I recall reading something about testing and I don't have the page in front of me. I'm sorry.
So Matthew, we did address that and it would be required under the new policy for anything with a DOT that requires a DOT license, any position, as well as public safety. My feeling is when we used to drug test 60 park kids to come in, it's money that I'm not sure that we're spending it wisely, especially now that cannabis is legal.
Yeah. And to that, following up on that, Anthony, I think virtually everything in this policy is required by federal law.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thanks. All right, good. So thanks again, Donna, for your work on this. And so board members, if you want to just email Donna with your comments and we'll take another look at this.
Very good. Thanks,
All right,
everybody.
great. Thank you.
All righty.
Good night.
Good night.
Okay, so next on the agenda, we have an proposed amendment to the host community agreement with Community Care Collective.
And Madam Chair, I'm going to recuse myself.
Okay, great.
If
Thank
you
you.
could, one of you could text me when you're done, I will rejoin.
Great.
Thank you.
Good evening, Chris.
Hello, everybody.
Hi.
Hey, Chris.
Hey.
Hello.
So you go ahead.
Great. So you guys have in your packet a new HCA between yourselves and the Community Care Collective. It'll look familiar because this is, you've already executed an HCA with the Community Care Collective probably just about a year ago now. And that HCA was for the site where they originally proposed to locate, which was at 531 King Street. When that, so that HCA was done about a year ago. The Community Care Collective was recently in front of the planning board to obtain a special permit for this site when they hit a snag when it was realized that their proposed location of 531 King was within 500 feet of a park, which is not allowed under the zoning bylaw. So it's my understanding that the applicant then started looking around for alternative sites at which it could potentially locate its business. It has found one, and that new location is 537 Great Road. So what you have now is an amended HCA that has been changed from the original that you've already approved just to change the address from 531 King to 537 Great Road. And otherwise is consistent with the one you signed last year. All of the financial and business terms are identical. The address has been changed. And I guess the one other thing that I'd note about this new version that you have now is the applicant proposed to remove a couple of conditions in the HCA that were specific to the original site. And those were fencing around the property line. There was one about access, how the building would be accessed. And there was also a reservation only requirement for at least the first couple weeks or months after it opened. That's also come out. So some of the site specific and operational things have been removed. If there's anything in those categories that the board wants to see added back in for the new location, we can certainly do that. But this current draft for this new site is more or less silent with respect to the sort of planning and site plan stuff that was addressed at least a little bit in the original version.
Okay, thank you.
So that's the long and short of it. Really just the same HCA with a new address.
Okay. Does the applicant have to do a community outreach?
The applicant will have to do a community outreach.
Okay. I'm just thinking as far as the site, the fencing, and even the hours of operation. If there's any, I don't know how close proximity neighbors are to the new site. If we
That's all
want to have
planning
some
board stuff, Madam Chair.
What, Chuck?
The site stuff. The site stuff is all planning board stuff. Frankly, it shouldn't have been in the original HCA, but I think it was
Okay.
put in there to appease. I don't know if it's members or neighbors, but it really is stuff that the planning board should be putting on them, not us.
Okay, what about hours of operation?
We can do that.
Thank
Sorry.
you. That's what I was starting to talk about.
A lot of the discussion was centered on issues with the property. We'd go out and meet with residents or do
Right.
site walks, and issues with security, issues with. I mean, there's certainly a planning board aspect to a lot of that, and we deferred on a lot of those issues. But I don't, the word I heard that I objected to most that Chris said was just the change in address. Well, if that were the case, we wouldn't have spent so much time on the location, hearing residents about that, and and then applying conditions that spoke to the site. Now, I welcome a better site, but I think it's a matter of process. At the very least, we ought to have invite abutters in, even if it's just one evening, present what the new location is. And then, I don't have any interest in opening up any of the other covered ground issues, but on that's not an insignificant change. If we were licensing something else, here's a restaurant, and they're moving to another location. Let's just change the license. Well, no, we'd want to come in and discuss that. So the same with the liquor, we do it with the liquor licenses. So, if that process means anything, and trust me, I welcome a change to a less controversial, impactful site. But I just think for the integrity of our process, we need to do at least a meeting where we invite them in to make a presentation and invite neighbors in to come in and, kick the tires on it.
Right. So
My opinion anyway. I don't know if council has a thought on that.
So to that point, Paul, and that's what I had started to say.
No, sorry about that.
No, not you. It was Mr. DeCoste. I kind of jumped in. No, which is fine. No worries on that. I have no problem doing this, but I'd like to, once he has a community outreach meeting, when we hear from abutters and other residents, there might be some requested changes in here, specifically with regard to hours of operation. So I'd hate to see us go through this process, have the outreach meeting happen, and then have residents come back to us and say, hey, wait a minute, we didn't get a chance to, have a presentation or provide input to the board on this. It's just, and like you said, Paul, it's just a process piece of it. I don't want to delay it any more than it needs to be delayed. I just want to make sure that we take the right steps. So how do we do that?
I think you've got one of two options. You could, as Paul suggested, defer this until after a meeting where you've invited the applicant to come in and present to you. That meeting wouldn't be the community outreach meeting that they're required to hold under the state regulations. But it could be sort of arranged to serve much the same purpose if you sent out notice to abutters or people in the area and invited them all to that meeting. Alternatively, that's option number one. Alternatively, I'd have to sort of think about the drafting, but I think it would also be possible to draft a condition that says, you're executing a provisional HCA with them now, but they need to come back in and talk to you a month after they've held that actual community outreach meeting. And you will then have the ability to layer on an additional set of site-specific conditions based upon the feedback you get at that meeting.
Okay.
It's
Why do we have to issue something now in any way, Chris? Why can't we just let them have their, I'm saying there's an option C. If they're going to be doing a community meeting, let them have the community meeting and then come meet with us at our very next meeting afterward.
that is option C.
So how will signing this document tonight help the applicant with the process?
So the applicant needs to, if it's going to move ahead at the new location, it's going to need to get that location not approved not only by you, but approved by the Cannabis Control Commission at the state level.
Okay.
In order to move forward at the state level with the Cannabis Control Commission, I believe they're going to need an executed HCA for their new site. That's sort of like the gatekeeping, you hold gatekeeping power for any applicant, and that's executing an HCA. So it is, in order to proceed in earnest with the state, I do believe they'll need a new HCA for this new site.
So Chris, if with your previous statement, would they be able to move forward with the provisional HCA?
We wouldn't, under my option number 2, we wouldn't really call it that. We would just call it an actual HCA, and it would contain a condition that said, you've got to come back later on.
So it'd be between us and the applicant then?
Yep.
Is the applicant on the line? So wasn't that part of this agenda item?
They are.
I would assume.
Joe, you're muted, but yes, they are on the line.
Okay, so we can hear from the applicant if we need to. Personally, I like the second option that Chris presented. I have absolutely no problem proceeding. I don't want to hold up the applicant whatsoever, but I do want to make sure that the board does their diligence, and we do, follow the process that we've already had in place to the best of our ability. But that being said, I do want to give the applicant the opportunity to go forward. So that's just my personal opinion. And Mr. Knox, I don't know if you have any comments or.
No, as long as the process is proper, and I agree with Paul, when you change locations, at least the people that are in that location should be able to speak up. But at the same time, I don't want to hold up the applicant in any way. So hope we can work that out to our advantage and their advantage is fine with me.
I hope there's a better idea than give them the license first and hold the hearing after. But something doesn't ring right to me in that.
Well, I think basically what would happen, Paul, and correct me if I'm wrong, is they have the community outreach meeting, we hear from abutters, and then we make some changes to the host community agreement to try to find.
I'm not opposed to that, but what I thought I heard was that we were going to vote on something tonight or sign something in advance of that, and then phrase it in such a way that if we hear something we don't like later, then we change it. But that's kind of backwards to my mind.
Well, I think it's just putting specific language in the HCA that gives us a flexibility to do that at a later date, but allowing the applicant to continue with the process while the community outreach meeting's being scheduled.
It's almost like putting conditions on a special permit or something like that, I guess. Chris, am I right in that regard?
I guess the one thing I want to make clear is that if we did it the way I just sort of described, I think we would necessarily be approving the site and preserving for ourselves the ability to add conditions. What I don't think would be possible to do is say, we're approving the site for now, but if we hear, considerable negative feedback later on at the community outreach meeting, we're pulling our approval. I think we drafted in such a way to preserve our ability to do site planning style conditions.
Like hours of operation or things like
hours
that.
of operation, reservation only, admitting customers on a reservation only basis for a certain number of time, fencing, lighting, things like that.
Hours of operations are on page 6. I mean, it's all in there, right?
Yep.
9 to 9 every day.
Yeah.
That's what's in the agreement currently.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
I guess I'd say we did, to your point, Paul, we did a whole bunch of diligence before, and apparently we missed what's being termed a park that was within 500 feet, which gave the applicant the opportunity to move forward. So
Any license we issue for a site specific, the site is a factor, and it comes up, if it's formal enough that we hold a hearing on it and people have a right to speak whether or not they think that site has an impact on it, that's part of our due diligence.
Yeah, but putting a fence up, that's not in the purview of an HCA. There's no other HCA in the state that has, you have to put up an 8-foot fence around the property. It's not in the HCA. It's just.
Those kind of weeds, I don't want to get down to it. It's just as simple as this. We're handing out a license for an activity that's going to happen at a site, and never mind the fact that it's a new activity, but we'd do this even if it were a liquor license or a restaurant. You have a hearing and people have a chance to come in and speak to it. We don't know what the feedback's going to be until we hear it. I'm inclined to say this is a good move, but I'm not comfortable saying.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it is a good move. I think it's. Clearly the applicant heard may or may not have won the fight as to whether or not the common is a park. I don't know, but even if he did win the fight, in all likelihood there would have been an appeal, and he'd have to go through the appeal process, and we know that would take an estimate of a year or 2 years, so that would hold everything up. So to his credit, he pivoted. I'm not sure if Chris used that term or Cindy used that term, but which we appreciate, because it certainly aggrieved a lot of residents that were abutters, and that same process could be followed if we were to move forward here. I understand everything you're saying, Paul, but I do feel that Cindy's point of view with us moving forward to kind of let him
continue with the process.
He has to refile with CCC, and it's my understanding that application fee isn't waived. He has to pay
He's actually got his hand raised. Not to cut you off, Chuck, but I see that I think Mr. Gianetta has his hand raised.
Or even Cindy.
Oh, there he is. You're muted, David. Oh.
Thank you. Sorry.
Hi. That's all right.
Thanks for letting me speak. And I appreciate you, taking this all into consideration. So Chuck hit the nail on the head. I mean, I have made this move as I realized that the abutters at the last location, the community as a whole, there was pushback on the common location. The discussion of a park, whether it is officially considered a park or not, to me, that's still up for discussion. But my intention is to find the path of less resistance, I'll say. And the overlay district in the common, there are not a lot of properties out there. So this is the one property that actually will meet the bylaw, because I've seen other properties. I've looked at Bank of America, I've looked at DCU. There's violations with all of them. So, the only time that this became even a thought was well after we had signed the HCA. We're now, into our first hearing, even a public discussion with the planning board, into the first hearing with the planning board. And it wasn't until then that this discussion, of a bylaw breach, if you will, comes to light. So that being said, the planning board is going to be the one to start talking about site-specific items such as hours of operation as well. If they're, fence, no fence, the intent of the fence before was that there was a very clear understanding that the residential neighbors had a concern that the two lot lines, their lot line and our lot line, were touching, they were abutting. And that was the solution. And the intent behind the fence was to, clearly show a delineation. My opinion, that wouldn't be needed here. We're going to be in an industrial park. It's very well buffered by woods. The parking is very isolated to one side of the building, furthest away from the street. So, you know, I would like that opportunity, as I have spent, you know, where we are. You're right, Attorney Heap. We're coming up on 2 years here. You know, a lot of money has been invested. A $10,000 fee is going to have to be paid to switch locations. That's just a simple fee. Never mind, I have to pay carry costs to the next location, which is in the lease, and I'll state it publicly. It's $5,000 per month that I have to pay in order to remain in this process. You know, and I feel as though I'm doing, you know, what's what's right for the community and what I would think the community would want. There are going to be multiple occasions coming up. One, the community outreach meeting, which is required by the CCC, and two, any planning board hearings that the abutters are going to have their opportunity to speak. I also had intentions to speak to them myself ahead of time. You know, so I'm doing the best I can here, and I would appreciate just a little assistance in being willing to make this shift, you know, this late in the game.
Yeah.
The town, you know, one more statement I'll make and I'll be quiet, but you know, the town signed off on a form that clearly states that it's a form that comes from the Cannabis Control Commission. It clearly states that I'm in compliance. You have two options. It's either no, not in compliance, or is in compliance with local bylaws and ordinances. That was checked, and that was sent into the CCC. That is only when they grant the provisional license, which is then when you then pay $10,000 for the fee. I did that. I paid that fee. I'm going to have to pay it again. So, you know, there's been some error on part of the town, and I'm trying to work with the town.
What error did the town, what error did the town make?
The town signed a form and checked off on a very clear box.
Who from the town? You got to hit your,
We did, Paul.
Okay.
We signed the last HCA. We said that site was.
Yeah.
met
That's
all
part
our
of the
zoning.
process.
Chuck and
Okay.
Paul, and maybe Chris, Attorney Heap can correct me if I'm wrong on this. My understanding is that when the form, which basically identifies whether or not it complies with local rules and regulations, doesn't mean that approvals are in place, just that it is a location that can get approved. So if it requires a special permit, it still is in a location that can be approved, and that it just means that the town doesn't have regulations that prevent it from moving forward. And that's what we checked off, that there was a special permit process that was available and that they applied for after that letter.
Right. So I appreciate what you're saying, David.
Thank you.
I do. And I appreciate Paul's position too, as far as the process. But like I stated, I am in favor of the option that Attorney Heap presented, which will allow us to move forward, allow you to move forward with this process, still hold the public outreach meeting, still have some flexibility within the agreement after those discussions if we got to come back and make some adjustments. And like you pointed out, it's got to go to the planning board process. But I just, personally just feel, let's just move forward with this to the best of our ability and do what we can do to help the process move forward. So that's my feeling about it.
with no public input
There will be public input, Paul.
after the fact.
Right.
Well, that's
Well,
what.
yeah,
All I'm saying is, look, I think this is great story to tell. Let's hold a hearing, notify the abutters and say it's only on the change of the venue, and it should be open and closed. Otherwise, it's a heck of a precedent we're setting.
Okay, so Chris, the original process, we held a public hearing. How much are we circumventing the original process by doing this?
I honestly can't recall whether you guys held a public hearing for this round, for the round of retail applicants that produced the CCC HCA and the Littleton Apothecary HCA. I know there were, I think, multiple meetings public meetings where we talked about negotiating the terms of the HCA.
Right.
I honestly can't recall whether there were hearings before you decided whether those sites were appropriate.
Even if it were a formal hearing, my position would be the same, a meeting or a hearing, whatever it is.
And I know going back to past the adult use retail locations, which we were handling a year ago, going back to the medical sites several years ago, I know that there were multiple public presentations before there was an HCA with, I think, Sanctuary. So I can't recall precisely what was done for the retail, but there were certainly meetings where the HCA was negotiated, at least.
Okay. All right. I don't know if there's any other comments from the board. I mean, I'm in the position that I would prefer to move forward with this evening based on the recommendation from town council. So I'm going to ask.
But
Go ahead.
I gave
the option that you gave. How about
I gave
that?
a list of
Not the
options
recommendation.
in terms of
The second option,
I have
option
no-
2.
I have no opinion myself as to which of these options
Sorry.
you should
No,
pursue.
yeah, no, it would be option 2. So that's just my thought. Mr. DeCoste, I believe
I agree
you
with that.
concur with me.
Yeah, I do. I really feel like this is,
Right.
you know, I
Right.
said it. I think I said it at the last meeting. I want to get both shops up and running, and
Right.
selfishly, I want the revenue. I mean,
Chris, can you repeat what option 2 actually is?
So I think the options that we laid out were number one, option number 2 was sign this new version of the HCA with the applicant for the new location tonight. Or if not sign it, vote to approve it.
Right.
Subject to some revisions that we can make in the next couple days. Those revisions would be that the applicant would need to hold its community outreach meeting for the neighbors and anybody who was interested in coming at some point in the very near future. And then after they did that, come back to the board, reopen the HCA, and agree that the board could add a new set of conditions specific to this particular site later on, after having heard public input.
David, how quickly can you get that done?
So my intention was to get through this meeting, hear what was said, and then I am filing my notices for the upcoming planning board hearing. So I intended on filing the notices for the community outreach meeting simultaneous to that. So as quickly as I have to notify in the newspaper 2 weeks in advance, or for 2 publications, I should say. Very similar process as the planning board notices. So I would say the short answer would be very close to the time of the planning board hearing, if not before, which is March 4th.
March 4th is the planning board hearing?
Correct.
Okay. Okay, and so the public outreach, though, you have to run it for 2 consecutive weeks?
Correct.
Um,
I believe if I notify by Friday, what's today's date? Today's the 8th, Friday's the 12th. So 1, 2. So if I notify the paper by the 12th, I believe they will publish the 19th and the 26th, which would then allow me to have it. I could have it on even the 2nd, let's say, for instance. So I could even have an opportunity to come before or host my meeting prior to the planning board hearing.
okay. All right, and so then you're not going to submit the amended HCA prior to the planning board hearing, correct? Or would you be submitting it prior to then?
No, I would, I do not intend on withdrawing from 531 King Street until I'm approved with a
Okay.
special permit from
Okay,
at 537 Great Road. So therefore, I would not be requesting a location change with the Cannabis Control Commission until that happened.
okay. All right, so it seems like the time frame would still work out that you could have the outreach meeting when fairly quickly. And
Yes.
without getting this document signed tonight, it wouldn't really delay the process. And that would give the board time to attend that meeting and maybe hear from the residents. Is that correct?
Yes, and I mean, I would even, I would encourage that as far as having a joint meeting would be fine by me. You know, if we had a few members of, you know, from the board or, you know, this is a different process where it's totally unexpected and it's different than what the process was intended to be.
Mhm.
But, you know, I'm willing to work with the both boards as best as possible. I do want to get through the terms of the HCA though, you know, within a shorter time frame as well. So I mean, it's kind of hard for us to sit here and say that you know, we want to wait until we get to the planning board prior to signing an HCA. You know, so
Yeah.
my feeling, and I'll say it one last time, is anything that came up of any of the select board meetings for 531 King Street were always site related. And therefore, it was not until the planning board hearing that we had this pause, I'll call it. So the upcoming planning board hearing would also create such a pause in the event that there was going to be an issue with this other location. If that makes sense, how I've explained it.
Yeah. Okay. So what's the favor of the board?
I'm comfortable with option 2.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
You know my position. I just don't think it's I don't think it's unreasonable to ask that we use the same approach that we had instituted earlier, and that sounds like it can be done as quickly as scheduling it for our first open meeting after the community the mandated community meeting is held. Same night's fine with me, or next night, whatever it is, and that we should at least have the process where we notify abutters of a new applicant that we're issuing a license for in their vicinity before we vote or sign anything.
Right. David, what's the proximity to abutters to this location? You indicated it's more of an industrial site.
So there are no residential abutters, whereas before there were 1, 2, 3 residential abutters, lot line to lot line. There are no residential abutters. This is the location just behind Neshoba Air and Boiler Works. It's behind that building and to the left as you're pulling down the long private drive. It's heavily buffered by woods. All of the parking is set to one side, the west side of the property. You know, plenty of parking. I have a signed lease with 43 parking spaces, and there's only a requirement for 35. You know, so I'm really trying to cover all aspects. Chief Pinard has also viewed the security plan for the new location. He's also written a letter of support for the new location. You know, there's, you know,
If we had simply invited the neighbors, the butters, and followed the same process we did before to this meeting, would be done tonight. But we haven't done that. It sounds like it's a great site, and there aren't,
Right.
hopefully there won't be any objections.
Oh, we
but
didn't invite the neighbors. We
had a posted meeting for inviting public input in the earlier process.
It was a meeting just like this.
Fine.
They
So,
came because
yeah.
it said 531 King Street.
Right. So, I mean, honestly, I don't want to keep looking back on what transpired in the past as much as I appreciate, the comments made by David. I'm inclined to move forward tonight with the second option that Chris presented and just let the process continue based on what was represented to the board tonight. So,
I agree.
Mr. Layden.
I like that motion.
Just Madam Chair, before there's say action by the board, I did want to let you know that we do have someone with a hand raised. I don't know if we're receiving any comments.
Yeah, we can listen to the comment.
Okay. We have Christine Nordhaus.
Hi, Christine Nordhaus, 43 Star Hill, Littleton Apothecary. There was no public meeting or public notification before negotiating HCA's any, beyond the normal posting of a select board meeting. I'd like to remind the board that you signed a host community agreement with David Giannetta and his business entity, not with the property that he was choosing. You know that you can negotiate an HCA with him. I suggest and beg that you do. The extraordinarily expensive and arduous and needlessly bureaucratic process that the two applicants have been put through is borderline criminal, especially in light of the fact that perhaps David was never going to be able to reach zoning compliance, and the board just signed off saying that he would. I think you owe it to him to sign this HCA with some provision saying you'll make changes in a month or whatever, but let him get going and stop the hand wringing. This is the most expensive and prohibitive process for normal humans who are trying to start a business. And for a town that desperately needs the money, who claims to support small business people, stop fooling around with this and sign his HCA so he can move forward. Thank you.
Madam Chair, you're going to state for the record that that's someone who is also an applicant who is currently suing the town on these very issues for her own site. And if there was ever a reason to take the road of caution for the...
I'm not suing the town. I don't know where that came from.
Excuse me, I'm sorry.
We're all done. Thank you.
I'm not suing the town.
Thank you. Madam Chair, there's legal suits flying around with regard to that proposal, and there's counter actions going on at the same time, which we're all aware of. And boy, if that's not an invitation to slow it down, do it right legally, and get it right to avoid further litigation, I don't know what is. I mean, go ahead. If you want to move forward, go ahead. I'm just going to.
No, Paul, I agree with you. I mean, we had a direction we were already going in prior to Mrs. Nordhaus's input, which I do agree with you was inappropriate under the circumstances. So, I am not going to change my position. I am inclined to move forward tonight with this HCA. And based on the recommendation or the option presented by town council tonight, option 2, so that we can just move forward with this, and we'll let, what?
I'll make that in the form of a motion, Madam Chair,
Okay.
rather than us beating a dead horse here.
Yeah.
Can I just ask one quick question? I just want to make sure that Mr. Giannetta agrees with what we've outlined as well, because it's going to require a slight revision to the draft HCA. And it's going to require him to agree to come back and let us sort of reopen this and layer on additional conditions later on. So I just want to make sure that before we draft it, that he's on board with that approach.
Yeah. Yes, as I understand it, we're suggesting that there's going to be a condition in the signed HCA that indicates that we will revisit any concerns that might arise as a result of either the community outreach meeting where abutters will be notified and planning board meeting or hearing where again abutters will be notified and welcome to participate.
Great.
I'm in agreement.
Great.
Okay, right. Chuck, do you want to put together a motion?
I move that the select board, do we want to sign it or do we want to authorize the town administrator to sign it? I move the select board approve the HCA under the terms and conditions that Attorney Heap presented in option 2 for 537 Great Road. Well, do we have to put the address in there, Chris?
It's the
Or
one.
amend the existing HCA? Is that what we're doing? Or are we going with a new HCA because he hasn't withdrawn the other one, right?
I would frame it as enter into a new HCA, enter into a host community agreement with the applicant for 537 Great Road. Subject to the additional terms and conditions outlined by me this evening.
That's what I said.
Okay.
Second.
My motion.
Motion been made and seconded. All those in favor, Mr. Knox?
Aye.
Mr. DeCoste?
Aye.
Mr. Glavy?
I'll abstain.
Cindy Napoli is aye. The motion is approved as dictated by town council and Mr. DeCoste. Thank you, Mr. Gianetta, for coming forward tonight. So we look forward to getting notification of the host community, the outreach meeting rather, and plan on having some select board members attend that meeting and moving the process forward.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Do
Thanks,
appreciate you
Chris.
pivoting as quickly as
Thank
you
you all.
did, David.
Thank you, Chuck.
Yep. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
Okay.
Madam Chair, although some of the comments may have been inappropriate, Ms. Nordhaus isn't engaged in a lawsuit with the town at this time. She actually is a co-defendant in an appeal of a planning board decision. So there's a whole bunch of stuff stirring around, but I just wanted to.
Yeah, I inaccurately phrased it. We're involved in a lawsuit because of her proposal being challenged. She has subsequently made retaliatory actions or follow-up actions, which may not be a lawsuit, but they're also actions against the board. So whatever, I mean, I just, I don't know. I'm just done. So, okay, so let's invite Matthew back.
Joe, can you?
I'll text him.
Okay, thank you.
We're up to
9.
annual, I know. Annual town, special town meeting warrant for the May 3rd, 2021 meeting. Vote to open the warrant and set closing date of the warrant and insert articles.
So, Madam Chair, I just had a bunch of slides. I'll just go through quickly. So here's in your packet is the schedule for between now and town meeting as far as opening, closing, inserting articles, going to the printer and so forth. The next slide is also in your packet is a list of some of the potential warrant articles right now. I think there'll be others after tonight, especially with regard to the senior center. So unless you want to discuss anything in more detail, I know we have other people waiting. We can just do the motion to open the warrant, set the date and the closing date, and we'll insert articles at the next couple of few meetings.
Okay. Any questions or comments from the board on this? Okay. So we ready for a motion?
if If you are, I will move that the select board vote pursuant to Mass General Law, Chapter 39, Section 10, and Town Code, Section 41-1, to open the warrants for the Monday, May 3rd, 2021 annual and special town meetings forthwith, and to close said warrants on Friday, March 19, 2021 at noon. The said town meetings to be held in the Charles Ford K Gymnasium, Littleton Middle School, 55 Russell Street, Littleton.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. All those in favor, Mr. DeCoste?
Aye.
Mr. Knox?
Aye.
Mr. Glavy?
Aye.
Mr. Nordhaus?
Aye.
Cindy Napoli is aye, and the motion is approved as written. And next, we are on to 12 Robinson Road deed restriction discussion. I had asked for this to be placed on the agenda. I see that we have Jenny Merrill on the call with us as well. I don't know if there's any other, if any members of the Historic Commission are on the call as well.
We do, Madam Chair. Joe, do I see any hands? No hands.
Yes,
Oh,
we have
Linda,
Linda
sorry.
Stein.
Linda on? Okay, great.
How many Myers and Harrington attorneys are we going to have on tonight? Is Ivrea, is she on yet?
I know, right? She's coming up
Welcome,
next.
Jenny.
Hello.
Hi, Jenny. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. So thank you for joining us this tonight. Sorry for the delay. So I had met with the Historic Commission and discussed 12 Robinson Road. And as you know, we purchased the property for historic preservation. And there was a question came up about the deed and the restriction that's currently on it. What's the status of the deed? Just trying to figure out our options, which you had provided us with a really comprehensive summary, which I appreciate that. Thank you for that information. Because one of the things that we're talking about are next steps with respect to the property. So that was one thing that I wanted to bring before the board this evening. So I know that Linda's on the call. I see she's muted. Hi. How are you?
Good. How are you? Hi, Linda.
Good.
Hi. How are you, Jenny?
Yeah, so we were just trying to figure out what is the status of the property with respect to the deed and the any restrictions on it, or currently where does it stand?
So there is no restriction on the property yet. We have delayed putting a restriction on the property because when you guys acquired it, you acquired it with CPA funds, which requires some sort of restriction to be placed on it. Right. But you didn't know if you were going to keep it or sell it, and what you did with it would sort of inform your decision on whether or not you're going to convey a restriction to someone or retain a restriction when you sell it and be the holder. And I'm actually not sure, Linda, I think last time we talked, which was ages ago, there was some discussion about if the town continued to own the property, who would hold the restriction, which is a little more challenging with historic preservation restrictions.
Right. And we've been researching that, and I've identified one or two nonprofits that do that kind of thing. But as I mentioned to Cindy, the cost for one of them, the price is steep. It's $50,000, and it's in perpetuity. It's for forever, and they do a good job based on what they said they do to enforce the restrictions. But there hopefully would be less expensive options. But we would have, if the town keeps the property, then we would have to find a nonprofit to do that.
Joe, if I may, Madam Chair, Joe, did you, I know we talked about it, you found that nonprofit, did you deal with them in Grafton or?
No, when I was planner in Weston.
Yeah, so can you explain that?
So Yeah, so one of the things that we're trying to just figure out the next step with respect to the property. So Ginny, this is going to be a really silly question, but the town owns the property, correct?
Yeah. Let me see if I can pull.
Because I'm just trying to figure out how we hold it, how we currently hold the property. So as
All
the
right,
board,
let me pull up that deed because my recollection is that we I don't recall if we purchased it or took it by eminent domain, but
It was eminent domain.
It was eminent domain.
it
was
was, okay.
It was a friendly taking, but yes.
A friendly taking, yeah.
All right, so one of the things that we talked about with the historic commissions were next steps. So I don't know if the board is aware, but the property was inspected and there's a pretty comprehensive report that was brought forward to the board some time ago, outlining the condition of the property, and which led to the roof repair, as you may recall, that we undertook. So in speaking with Linda, the next step in this process to determine what direction we want to go with respect to the property would be to do a feasibility study, to take the report that was already provided from the inspection and just check. And
this is nothing that we talked about when we talked about taking it.
I know, just wait 1 second though, let me
Okay.
finish.
That's why I didn't cut you. You brought it up.
I know, your facial expression, just wait 1 second.
Says everything.
So in order to really determine what we want to do with the property, based on this report, we can use CPC funds to have a feasibility study and determine exactly what it will cost to renovate the property and whether it's worth it or something that we want to undertake or not. So that is why I asked Linda to come before the board tonight and to have this discussion with the board, because we really haven't talked about next steps with this process. But we've come this far, and I think there is a lot of support for, preserving the property. But what that looks like, we don't know yet because we don't have all the information. We have an inspection report, but we don't really know what it's going to cost to perform the work on the property itself. And a feasibility study, and correct me if I'm wrong, Linda, would give us that information, and we could use CPC funding to pay for that study.
Yeah, the feasibility study, we could, because we already have this building report, which is basically outlines the existing conditions of the property, which is one part of a feasibility study. The feasibility study could focus on identifying a few viable uses, future uses of the property, and what the associated costs would be for each of those uses based on the structural condition and the architectural features.
The select board owns the property, right?
Right.
Okay. And when we put this on the warrant to preserve it, it was, I think anybody that was on the select board at the time's understanding that it was going to be purchased, deed restriction was going to be put on it, and we were going to let somebody else. The thought was there that maybe we'd do something with the cultural council. That fizzled, but it was always the plan that we would put the deed restriction on it, sell it, put it out to bid, let somebody, if someone bids $1 and they're the high bidder, they get it. But the restriction is on there so that if there's any preservation that's done on that property, it's done by somebody else, and we aren't paying $4,000 a year to insure a piece of property, $60,000 for a roof. I mean, this is an albatross. We did the right thing by spending $250,000, I guess, to preserve a building that had a beam in it that somebody marked up with 1673. I mean, we're just going to keep throwing more and more money. Now we're going to do a feasibility study to see if we should throw more money at it.
Well, I mean, to me, Chuck, it's hard to put it out to bid when we don't know what it's going to take to do anything with it. I mean, what do we want to do with the property? Do you want to preserve it?
Yeah,
Sell it?
As long as there's a historical deed restriction on it, we put it out to bid, and whoever buys it has to hold it to that restriction. Just like if you put a conservation restriction, or there's.
I think this feasibility study would do little more than go back and reproduce the work that we already did. Yes, pay somebody to do the work that our working group largely already did, and we made a couple of presentations to the board After we purchased the building, and that's the most important thing. Purchasing effectively has it. I don't think we need to put a deed restriction on it for any period of time that the town owns it, because it's de facto protected. If we sell it to somebody else, then put it on there, sure. In the meantime, I remember that in order to address the pressing issues, the immediate pressing issues as far as the identified structural issues and maintenance issues, it was that there was potentially historic mass monies available for that, which have their time frames. I think you have to get your applications in sometime in the next couple of months. But in order to be eligible for any of that, you have to have historic preservation status. In order to have that, there was a couple of testing outfits we needed. One was borings, which I believe we did, and there was another one that was supposed to be underway. I'm not sure if that happened or not, but there's a couple of steps back that allow you to get the status as a historic, national recognized historic property, which allows you to get some of the money to do at least the maintenance preservation on the building. And then, we did have one viable potential candidate for an RFP, but then she withdrew her interest, wasn't going to be able to put it together. We thought that was going to happen. So,
right.
Then COVID came around, and, the more important thing we did was we protected the building. It's fine to restart it, but I hate to see us lose track of, stuff that we've already done and just spending money on somebody's feasibility study. Let me guess, there's somebody at the Collins Center rubbing their hands, waiting to come out and waste
Right.
some of the town's money, telling us what we already know. But
Well,
I'd like to, find out where we were, because the CPC gave us some of the money before to do those testing. That was going to get us on the track toward being able to get the National Historic status so that we could apply for the state money. And the state money's almost a guarantee. They give out their awards in like September every year if you got your grant in the spring and you have an eligible project, and it's usually about 35 grand for towns our size. So there's a path to getting that, but it doesn't require, hiring a consultant to tell us that.
right. So you're talking about the inspection report that was done, Paul?
Yeah, there were two. I forget what the detail. One was specific to a woman from Western Mass. I don't know if she was from UMass or wherever it was, who did borings, of the property. Linda might remember that better than I. And then there was a second. There were two specific tests that need to be done. It's a matter of our record somewhere.
So you think that's enough just to issue an RFP based upon?
But I just know that those were requirements to be able to apply for National Historic Register status.
So I think, first of all, let me just mention a couple of things. We have an application in, we are applying currently for National Register status. That takes a while. It takes a few months at least. It's in process. It's been in process for about 6 months. We're not sure when we'll hear back from that. Once we get either that status, or I believe, or we have a deed restriction, either one of those, then we can apply for that state grant that you're talking about. I think I'd have to go back to my notes, but without having either National Register status or a deed restriction on it, we're not eligible for that state grant. So that was why we didn't apply for it. And just let me mention one other thing about the feasibility study. It wouldn't just look at what we already have. What it would do, the professional consultant who would do that would look at a few specific future use options and come up with professional cost estimates as to what the cost would be for each of those options.
Okay, thanks.
I think there's a lot of other things we should spend the money on before this.
Okay.
I think we should put this out to bid.
I know, Madam Chair, you had, I thought, a very proper idea that as we're, we haven't got far enough along into our reimagining the common along the lines of the master plan, and this clearly should play into that somehow. But rather than trying to deal with this piece in a vacuum, I don't want it to fall off the radar, and so I appreciate that we're talking about it, but it ought to globally fit into a bigger vision of what we're doing there in the common area.
Well, it does fit into the master plan, certainly preserving the historic homes in the common is specifically stated in the master plan. I know that we've had discussions with Northern Bank and Trust who are, hopefully going to move forward with developing that strip. The preservation of that property has been mentioned in those discussions as well. And
Well, that makes sense. I mean, mitigation or whatever those, if we
Right.
identify that as a priority, maybe they become a
Right.
kind of a patron of that building.
Right. And to Chuck's point about, when we acquired the property at town meeting, we had discussed options about what to do with the property going forward. But we as a board never decided, yeah, we're just going to acquire the property and then just, get rid of it. We wanted to really look into what were the possibilities of what could be done with that property, is the way I remember it. So that's why I'm bringing this to the board tonight, because we haven't talked about this in a long time. So I did want to bring it back to the board so that we could have this discussion. I think we need to figure out a path going forward. The feasibility study is just one of the options, that we're going to talk about tonight. So I'd like to hear from Mr. Knox and Mr. Nordhaus as well with their thoughts on this.
The only problem I have is I can see us doing a feasibility study and be here in a year and a half at the exact same place without having anything done. Well, not done, but without any solutions, and we're going to be going through the same thing all over again. Why can't we put a deed restriction on it right now?
Because I don't think we know what we're going to use it for, right? Is that correct, Jenny? There's a couple different options depending what the use is going to be.
Well, you can put one on right now if you have someone to convey it to. There was a thought that you guys might end up selling the property.
Right.
In which case that would give you the opportunity to be the one holding the restriction, because you can't both own property and hold a restriction on it. Those property interests will merge. So if you could find someone to hold the restriction, you could put one on it now. And really what you would be promising to do is not, altering the important historical features of the house. And somebody would need to make that determination, what those are.
So we can only put the deed restriction on it if we have a buyer for it?
No. So a reason why you've held off is because who would hold it? Who would hold the restriction? We didn't have someone in mind.
Keep the property.
Well, no, to enforce the restriction. So if you were going to keep the property and so you're going to put a restriction on it because you're required to, you would have to find somebody who was going to be the holder of that restriction, and that person would make sure that you did not step out of line and alter it in a way that you promised you wouldn't.
And that can't be our historical commission.
And that can't be part of the town, because it is.
What about the
real
historic
property
society?
interest.
What about the historic society, which is not a town entity?
501c3.
It could be. It could be that.
We did ask them, and they did not want to take that on a few months ago. Is Carolyn on the line? She could speak to that if she is.
She is on the line.
Thanks.
Carolyn? You have to unmute, Carolyn.
Yep, I just got the message.
Hi.
Hi. Yeah, we did talk to the Historical Society. I mean, this was a long time ago. It was back before COVID, so it's probably been at least a year or more. And I think at that time, they didn't have enough information as to what was going to happen, and they were all a little leery about it. But I think if we can make a good presentation, and I think if they saw that, the select board and other people were behind the project, that we might be able to come to an agreement and maybe possibly hold that restriction. But I don't want to speak for the board right now, because we haven't really met for the last year either. So we're kind of out of the loop.
And my understanding is that the main activity of the holder, which is we have to have a holder, is that they enforce the deed restriction. They're the enforcer. So whoever, if the Historical Society is willing to take on the role of enforcer, then they could be the holder.
That's right.
Right, and it's also, as like some of the other entities that Linda has talked about, it's a money factor. You have to have, some kind of like endowment for anything that might occur if there's any kind of legal issues. And I think that was also one of the other stumbling blocks at the time.
Okay. All right, thank you. Matthew, do you have any comments?
I'm curious. I'm not sure I understand, like, I think, like, as Chuck said, I think my impression was that the town or the board did not want to own this and manage it. We wanted to find a seller for it. I'm not convinced that a feasibility study is going to do any good as far as finding someone to buy it. If someone wants to buy it, they're going to come and look at it and figure out what it's going to cost to renovate or change around or whatever. And having that information, I guess I just see it as marginally useful. I think, I would rather focus on protecting the house and finding someone who can do something useful with it. Even if it's, as Chuck mentioned, for $1, it's small money. Like, at least we have a cultural thing in town, or, a historical thing in town. It does seem like maybe this is just kind of a sunk cost. Like, we bought it and now we want to do more for it. I don't think that the study is going to get us much.
Okay. So we can probably get the same end result without the feasibility study, and just issue an RFP and just move. We need to move it forward. We need to make a decision on what we want to do with the property. So if it's not the favor of the board to go forward with the feasibility study, that's fine with me, but it's a discussion that we have to have about what the next step's going to be with this property, because it's been in limbo. So.
Well, if you're looking for concrete next steps, and I appreciate that's a good idea, Madam Chair, then we should focus on getting that National Historic Register status. And as if Linda said, it's either that or the deed restriction that allows us to get the in the queue for one of the historic mass historic programs. They've got several, but I think we decided earlier there was one that best met our needs. Then maybe a deed restriction is, maybe we need to get that as a check the box thing first. And knowing that we don't know what we're ultimately going to deal with it, I think we're going to need a pretty broad deed restriction and somebody who understands that. So I guess perhaps finding out whether or not the Historic Society will play that role, if we can come to terms with them. If not, find another entity to hold it so that we can get in the line for the mass historic money, so that we can get, do some repairs to the building. Meanwhile, on a parallel track, try to go after ideas.
Right. Yeah, I think it takes a long time to get on the National Historic Register. I remember
but we've been on it, for 6 months, Linda, already, you said, right?
I think
It's for about 6 months. It could be a few more months. It could be longer until we find out.
Okay. All right, that's fine with me.
That whole track that Paul was just talking about is if we own it, as far as getting the state money and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
If we put it out to bid and somebody bought it for $1 or $100,000, whatever, somebody bought it for some undisclosed amount of money, then we would hold the restriction. Correct,
Right.
Jenny?
Yes.
And that person could still go for all those to have it registered
Right.
and everything else. And it's on their dime, it's on their clock and everything else. And we get the benefit of having a nationally registered property in town.
Right.
That's the best case scenario, Chuck. I like that idea, but finding that entity.
I think only municipalities or nonprofits can apply for that state grant. It can't be a private government, a private business.
As far as the funding, the
Right.
state funding is concerned.
Okay.
So that's one reason to look for nonprofits, especially.
Most of the people that do these types of restorations, Linda, they're pretty savvy, and they've got a 501c3 set up in parallel to their construction company or development company.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay.
All right, so we'll draft an RFP with that specific language of what we're looking for.
Can I
Is that
ask
what we're saying?
can I ask if you would look into RFPs for buying or leasing? Would you consider leasing it to a nonprofit? That they would
I'll
manage
answer for
it?
myself. I wouldn't. I don't want the town to own it because we have all the liability.
Yeah, I mean, I guess only in the case if for some reason they were going to do all the repairs and still wanted to lease it. Otherwise, if they're just leasing it and we have to repair it, what's the point?
Right. I think that, so I have seen nonprofit leases where they do the repairs in historic buildings. I think the Historical Society does some of their own repairs, and in some other towns that the nonprofit does all of their own repairs.
Okay.
Madam Chair, if you want, if going forward with getting an RFP drafted, I would very much encourage you to please share a draft amongst board members before it's put on the agenda as an item. It's something we ought to kick around a little bit.
All right. Yep, we can do that.
Everybody's got good ideas, so we want to take full advantage of them.
And encourage folks, if anybody's watching, if people have done this in the past or they know of people that might be interested in doing it, I mean, by all means, send them in to us.
Right. Okay, so we'll move forward with an RFP. And then the only other thing to talk about tonight was pest control plan. And there was one recommendation in that inspection report about securing the bulkhead on the property. As you may recall from, I think it was last winter, we had some critters who were occupying the premises, and it was getting costly to exterminate them and remove them. But there is a recommendation in there just about doing something simple with the bulkhead, just to secure it. And maybe that's something that even, we can do on the town side, and we don't need to.
Yeah, but if there's a little bit more cost on either of those items, I think there's maybe where we go to the CPC for. I mean, if it's in the interest of preserving that building.
I don't think CPC will cover maintenance.
Well.
Yeah. I mean, even if it's just putting a tarp over the bulkhead or just to have somebody look at it, maybe Mr. Mullen can look at it and just see exactly, what we need to do. But I think we still own it. I mean, we still have it. We should try to secure it to, the best we can based on that one recommendation. The other one was the roof, and we already did that.
Yeah, both Ed and the building inspector who did the whole report, they both said that we should do pest control for powder post beetles because there's some damage, and it was suggested that we do it in the spring.
Okay. All right.
Maybe the facilities director could do it.
So, Jenny, can you help us with the drafting of the RFP?
Certainly. Yep. And I would suggest that you're going to want to put in the RFP basically whatever important characteristics you would have in your restriction. You're going to want to put that in the RFP as whoever's going to buy it is going to do X, Y, and Z.
Okay.
Preserve these pieces. So, if the Historical Commission has thoughts on that, that'll be useful.
Yeah, we can talk about that, sure.
And because you want to make sure that you can somehow preserve the house and also ensure like ADA access and things like that.
Okay. All right, good.
While we were talking, I also just sent an email to Mass Historic asking if there were similar projects that the town put out an RFP just to get some examples.
Okay, great. Thanks, Joe. All right, good. Any other questions or comments on this topic?
Can I make a comment?
Oh, sure.
So I guess I'm just really disappointed in the way that this has kind of played out. I understand the position of people who just want to get it off the books, but I don't think this is kind of what we discussed back when it was purchased. And I really think it was would have been a great opportunity for us, especially with the common redevelopment coming in. It would have been a great focal point. It's a great chance for us to preserve and use a building with historical character. And I guess that's all I want to say. I guess I'm disappointed that the feasibility study wasn't.
Yeah,
that's not off the books at all. That's
exactly what we want.
No, I realize that, but I guess when we were talking before about the feasibility study, it seemed like a great thing, not just for preservation, but for the use of the building.
Right.
And seeing other feasibility studies that have happened, it tends to give you a focus. And I think that was kind of what we were hoping for.
Right. So Carolyn, I think with the way we draft the RFP, I think we can still, from what I'm hearing, we can still get there to where we want to be with this property and preserve it. I think we can still get there. It's just a different process.
Yep.
So,
That was exactly the intention. That's why we bought it, to make sure that it didn't get bulldozed.
yeah.
Right, but it's more than just preserving the structure. It's what happens within the structure.
Yeah, but
Right.
yeah, agreed. But I mean, there's a lot of things we want to do, but we just don't have the resources to do it. So
Well-
if we can use our resources that we do have available to us to facilitate somebody else to be able to do it, that's a win-win.
Yeah.
Right, but we don't know that we don't have the resources and what could happen. But I understand your point.
Right.
We've agreed to disagree, I guess.
Yeah. So let's go through the RFP drafting process. Linda can be involved in that. Carolyn, you can as well, and just see what language we can work, through with Jenny to see what we come up with. But I think that's, the best next step.
Yeah, to that point, the RFP, you don't need to award this to the highest bidder or anything. You can structure the RFP to ask them to tell you what type of use you're going to have with the property, and have comparative criteria where you evaluate their proposal for that use. So, you can encourage respondents to tell you what program they would put in place or how they would use the building.
Okay.
Can I just ask, in an RFP like this, can we mention types of uses, or should we not mention any types of uses?
You can mention types of uses. Particularly, you have a lot more flexibility if you're selling the property than you do if you're leasing the property, because there is some difficult case law with long-term leases where towns that try to retain too much control over how the property is designed and used, that those can be interpreted as a public construction project. But if you're selling it outright, there hasn't been a case that I know of where they've actually declared that to be a public construction project.
Make it, Jenny, about as broad or as narrow as you want it to, and you can include as much language as you want, directing people in certain directions too, right? I mean, if that's your intent, it's in our hands to do what we want with that.
Yeah, if there's particular types of reuses you want for the property, you should put that in the RFP and then require that they respond to that.
Right.
Okay.
But you got to be careful about putting uses in, because that limits the amount of
Right.
respondents.
Right. Maybe we could mention some uses, but use language that we're open to other uses as well.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, good. Any other questions or comments? All right, good. Jenny, thank you so much for waiting
You're welcome.
for this.
Linda and Carolyn as well.
Have a good night.
Thanks, you
Thanks.
too. Bye,
Okay.
Linda.
You
Thank you.
too.
Bye,
Thanks.
Carolyn.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay, so now we're on to item number 11, Town Administrator, Assistant Town Administrator update.
1 second. All right. So we have 4 things on here, and before we start, I wanted to bring up something I didn't put on the agenda, but Chuck had mentioned Jamie Gutner earlier on the call. Jamie was the interim COA director. So Jamie's name is resurrected lately because with Nicole still being on maternity leave and only working part-time, we had some salary wiggle room. So I know Ashley could use a little mentoring. So I had Jamie agreed to come back at Nicole's hours for some mentoring time with Ashley at the EHS, and I think it's been quite effective, and Ashley certainly appreciates that. So I just wanted to mention that.
And that's a testament to you, Anthony, for taking advantage of a resource that you knew was available, and it's a win-win. We've got someone covering for Nicole, but we also have someone with experience who's helping to guide and lead and mentor Ashley as well. So thank you for doing that.
Oh, thanks, Chuck.
Great.
Okay, so the first thing, Joe, you want to take the donation from the filming?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Anthony. pretty straightforward. The production team of Marvel / Dexter is donating $3,000 to the town. So the request is to have the select board accept that donation.
Okay,
Thank
great.
you. Possible Productions. Madam Chair, you ready for a?
I am.
Okay, move that the select board vote to accept a gift donation of $3,000 from the Marble production team.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. All those in favor, Mr. Nordhaus,
Yes.
Mr. DeCoste,
Aye.
Mr. Glavy,
Aye.
Mr. Knox,
Aye.
and Cindy Napoli is aye. The motion is approved as written. And next,
Madam Chair, the next thing, Cheryl Stellar is with us, and she's just going to briefly go over some update to the FY22 operating capital budget. Cheryl, welcome back.
hi, Cheryl.
Hi.
Cheryl, did you get a nap in?
I wish. Do you want me to share screen so I can just
Yeah.
move the slides? Yeah. All right, thank you, everyone. I just wanted to provide a brief update on the FY22 budget and some changes to the original draft budget that we had presented now that we have some additional information that's come through. One of the items is the governor has filed his budget, and so we do have some state aid and state assessment numbers at this point. Which is typically that's what we use for our budgeting process. So when it comes to the state aid, the good news is that the state aid is pretty much on point with what we were budgeting, which is great. The better news is actually we were fairly, I don't want to say conservative, but we expected assessments to go up fairly significantly, not really knowing what was going to happen. We know the MBTA has been in trouble and whatnot. And so as a result of that, our assessments went up about $200,000 less than we had budgeted. So that money is now available budget dollars. And my recommendation is to utilize that for some of the capital needs that we have in the capital plan, which if you do would bring the available cash capital funds to 1.8 million. We have had some operating budget adjustments totaling $45,000, which will reduce our operating budget surplus to about $4,000. As mentioned earlier today and previously, we have two additions to the capital plan of 1.2 million. 200,000 was the roundabout project that Chris Stoddard presented, I think, at the last meeting. And then the other is the senior center design project, which was discussed earlier tonight for $1 million. And one of the items that I wanted to mention was to consider potentially borrowing, as Sean had presented in his slides earlier, actually borrowing the $1 million for the senior center design project versus utilizing some of the 1.8 available in cash capital. So these are the operating budget adjustments that came through after we had initially presented the budget. We did receive the sewer enterprise fund budget, which informs our wastewater management line. And that was about an $84,000 change over what we had expected. But it's really not a huge budget impact because we were carrying the sewer debt on the town side. So it's pretty much a $4,000 increase overall. It's just moving it from our debt service over to the sewer budget. Property liability insurance, we received information on the rates. And so that was that adjustment. And then adjusting our water budget under the public buildings. That's really just based off the experience we have in FY21 so far. So those are the overall operating budget increases of 45,000. As far as kind of capital recommendations, and this is really just for your discussion purposes as you continue to think about, is just, considering the top priorities each department, consider the ones that have other funding sources available to them. Like I mentioned before, consider borrowing for the senior center design project, and, major maintenance. The next few slides are actually just the capital requests, which you've previously seen and have been sent to you in a chart form as well too. I won't really go through these because you've seen these already. I just wanted to point out that we have added the highway article and the senior center article to them. But other than that, they're the same articles that you've seen previously. So happy to answer any questions.
I've got one, Madam Chair.
Sure.
Cheryl, is it too early to know whether there's anything in the federal COVID rescue bill or the pending federal COVID recovery bill that will come? Because there's been a lot of talk that a lot of the money's coming to states and cities and towns, but have we seen any details of that yet?
No, in fact, I actually just saw an article today about how Governor Baker is actually pushing for it, and he doesn't normally kind of push these types of agenda items, but that he is pushing for some aid to local governments, but it's still, very much up in the air at this point.
Right. I'm sure you're tracking all that, though. Huh?
Trying to.
Thank you.
All right, great. Any other questions or comments for Cheryl? Great. Thank you, Cheryl.
You're welcome.
Okay, so next on the agenda is we're going to schedule a joint meeting.
So, yeah, the next item, as I mentioned earlier, the appointment of the Neshoba Valley District Tech School Committee. The school committee already scheduled a meeting for March 18th, so we would need a quorum of the board to be present at that meeting. So if you could just pencil that in your books.
What's the date?
March 18th.
Would it be in the evening? I assume it would be in
Yes, it would be in the evening. It's just a regular school committee meeting.
A Zoom meeting as well, right?
Yes, I'm sure it's a Zoom meeting. Yes.
Right, and we'll probably have a time specific or something like that.
Hopefully first thing on the agenda. So that's what we did last time. We went there. If you remember, we had that alternate station, and then we left.
Okay.
So that's it with that, Madam Chair. I don't need a motion on that.
Okay. And then next, the amendment to the Director of Finance and Budget Town Accountant contract.
Yes, if I can just pull that up.
Okay.
Is that up there?
Yeah.
It is.
Okay.
Now you're gonna depend on my aging eyes to read.
Yeah, I'll make it bigger for you, Paul. So, Madam Chair, in executive session, we just to inform the public, we discussed when Cheryl was hired. She was hired under the premise that after a year that her salary would be looked at. Unfortunately, that didn't happen then. I think a lot has happened since then, but we're finally back on track with that. So this is really taking a look at Cheryl's position and certainly comparing it to other finance director positions. And the recommendation is to make some step increases, currently from a grade 13, step 3, that she would go to a grade 13, step 7, effective retroactively from January 1st, 2021. And then she further get a salary step increase to a grade 13, step 8, effective July 1st, 2021.
Okay, great.
All right, I can barely read that, Anthony, but I'll give it the old college try here. I'll move that the select board approve the amendment to the contract of Director of Finance and Budget, Town Accountant Cheryl Herrick Stella to Section 6 to reflect a salary step increase to grade 13, step 7, effective retroactively from January 1st, 2021, and a further salary step increase to grade 13, step 8, effective July 1st, 2021, payable in prorated installments corresponding to the town's payroll schedule.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. All those in favor, Mr. Nordhaus?
Yes.
Mr. Knox?
Aye.
Mr. Glavy?
Aye.
And Cindy Napoli is aye. The motion is approved as written. Thank you, Cheryl, for working with us through that.
Thank you.
Glad you're staying with us.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. I just, like I said, I really do appreciate you working on this with me, and I've appreciated my time here. It's been a great experience. The time has oddly enough flown by, but also I feel like I've been here for many years as well too. So I don't know how that happened, but
Joe Layden nodding his head. Yep.
I might have a gray hair now or two, but no, I really do. I enjoy working with all of you. I enjoy working with everyone in the town, and it's really been a pleasurable experience.
We think
Thank
so
you.
too.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks so much, Cheryl.
Thank you.
And next on the agenda, we have meeting minutes from January 19th, 2021 and January 25th, 2021.
Okay.
Are there
Madam
any
Chair, I
comments on
actually
those?
have one recommended change on page 3, just a clarification. Yes, on the January 25th minutes, item 3, where it has public input members updates. It just sounds that I was making a random comment there. It says, Paul Glavy said there were quite a few high school students picking up trash in several areas of town last Saturday and extended his appreciation. What's lost in that is in town last Saturday, I think we'd like to add the phrase as part of an organized school program.
Yeah, that's it. That's it.
I wasn't just like
important
driving
detail.
around town looking at people randomly picking up trash.
Right. Yeah. No, a little more detail there would be.
Sue Raymond, if you're listening there, as part of an organized school program is the amendment I'd like to see in there. Thanks.
I have two very small typos. The second paragraph of item 4 under department board updates, it says use of town property indicated that filming would before 2 days. And I assume that should be before 2 days, BEFOR.
Right.
And then in the second paragraph of item 6, the town administrator update, it says that somebody was asking a questing. So just, I'm sure, spell check doesn't always work, but it was, that's all I could find. So well done.
Okay.
Right. If that's all the recommended changes, then I'll make a motion, Madam Chair.
Sure.
Move that the select board vote to approve the regular session meeting minutes of January 19th, 2021 and January 25th, 2021 as amended.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. All those in favor, Mr. Knox?
Aye.
Mr. Glavy?
Aye.
Mr. Nordhaus?
Yes.
And Cindy Napoli is aye. The motion, the minutes are approved as amended. And so that concludes our meeting for this evening.
A long meeting, but a meaty meeting. Good.
Yep.
Good stuff got done. So I'll make a motion to adjourn if that's what you're looking for.
Please.
I second.
Motion's been made and seconded. All those in favor, Mr. Knox?
Aye.
Mr. Glavy?
Aye.
Mr. Nordhaus?
Aye.
Cindy Napoli is aye. That concludes our meeting for this evening. Good night, Littleton.
Good night.
We will